Excellent, thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Board of Finance Budget Workshop for Thursday, March 4th, 2021. Welcome, everyone. Going to make a few opening comments, and we will get started with our proceedings. Good evening and welcome to tonight's Board of Finance Budget Workshop meeting. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment to provide an introduction to tonight's proceeding and our structure. Tonight, as we do at all of our regular meetings, we will begin and end our workshop with public forum. In between the public forums will be the one agenda item that we do have, and that is to consider and take possible action on the proposed fiscal year 2021-2022 budget. During our Tuesday night public budget hearing, there were presentations on the town budget and the Board of Education budget, as well as the opportunity for the public to ask questions of town and school leaders and provide comments during a closing public forum. I'd like to be clear that the public may make comments during the public forum periods, but as this is a board workshop, there will only be questions and dialogue between Board of Finance members and town and Board of Education leaders. As we are in a virtual meeting setting this year, you may have noticed that everyone has been placed on mute to limit unintended noise distractions. When I open up public forum, we will individually unmute those who wish to make a 3-minute comment, but ask that members of the public, should they want to speak, use the raise hand function to identify themselves, as we're probably all used to using that function now after a year of being on Zoom nonstop. Before those attending virtually are given the chance to speak, we have received several written comments that will be entered formally into written record, will be attached to our meeting minutes of this meeting, and which I will summarize the best as possible for the viewing and listening audience. At this time, I would like to proceed to agenda item number 1, which is public forum, and summarize the written comments received. As I am doing that, please use the raise hand tool to identify yourself as a participant who wishes to speak. It may take a little bit to get to you because I do want to do the written comments first. I printed them out. They have been attached to our board pack. Some of them are lengthy, some of them not so much, but I will read them as best as possible into record. And I will do it in order as they were received. We received a comment email from Arena Esterlis, 9 Garrison Drive. She wrote, thank you for listening to the community regarding the needs for all. She was writing in support of an equity person position to ensure diversity and equity in all schools. Her understanding the position is part-time. She's full support of full-time. There are 7 schools in the district. With various age groups, a full-time person would have a great opportunity to make a difference in the lives of all and make sure that no student of any race, gender, orientation, height, width, mental abilities feels an ism. Erica Walden, A.W. Cox, ABAR member, 234 Joshua Point Road. This is a little bit long, but I will summarize it. She's in support for the proposed part-time equity position, which would help ensure that all students and staff in Guilford are acquiring the knowledge and skills needed to live and thrive as active members of a diverse society. Our children deserve to learn true history and be exposed to people and cultures that are similar to and different from what they know. She did go on to say she's a graduate of Guilford Public Schools, and she did not acquire the skills and knowledge to reduce prejudice and combat systemic racism until she was in college and graduate school. She does not want the same for her daughter, who is currently in kindergarten at Cox. An equity position is an important step in the right direction for the public schools and will benefit all students in Guilford. Another fairly long one, Meg Teep, 115 Russet Drive, A.W. Cox Elementary School parent, writing in support of the proposed Board of Education budget for the 21-22 school year. In particular, she'd like to add her support for the residency program and the district equity liaison line items. As a member of the A.W. Cox ABAR committee and a board member of the Special Education PTO, she said, it is clear to me that Guilford Public Schools needs to commit to accountability-driven equity work and that the equity liaison position is a small but essential step in the right direction. The rest of this, which is fairly long, will be on record. Sarah Johns, 45 Faulkner Drive. This one I could read in. I am in support of adding the part-time equity position to our schools. I believe this position will benefit all the students and teachers in our town, along with the overall community. Those that are opposed, that believe it will only benefit a small amount of our students, are exactly the reason we need a position like this in our community. We have a lot of work to do to educate our students and community on being anti-racist and anti-bias, and clearly and urgently need a program and someone to do the work. And finally received in the last couple of days, Christina Parent. The one I just read and the next one from Christina Parent were received very recently, like a couple hours ago. They will be entered on the board pack and entered into our meeting minutes. But it does say she'd like to express her gratitude for our service to the town of Guilford. She's unable to attend this evening's meeting, but would like the opportunity to offer support for the proposed Board of Education budget. In particular, firmly in favor of 3 positions in the Board of Education budget that she believes are critical to the health and well-being of all students in the public schools: the equity officer, the residency program, and the addition of a social worker. It is the responsibility of our school district to ensure that each child feels heard, seen, and is given the opportunity to thrive while under the care and supervision of their school. Each of these positions have an opportunity to offer a lifeline or connection that is currently missing in Guilford. She did note also during the Board of Education public forums, there was tremendous public support for these 3 positions. The last one I want to read is one that should have been entered. It has to do with the budget. It should have been entered probably on February 18th. The board has received this. We all received it on February 9th. And actually, I apologize to this particular person because it should have been entered into record and we missed it. This is from Sue Ireland. I'm sorry, I don't have the address. Oh no, I do, 74 Dome Avenue. I'm going to summarize this because it is very long, but I will read the following. My name is Sue Ireland and I live at 74 Dome Avenue here in Guilford. I've lived in Guilford. I got cut off here. It says, I think it was for approximately 20 years. She wrote a lot of personal items that I will leave to be just entered into the record. She gave this background and she said, I am writing to you about the current budget that is headed your way for review and possible revision and approval. From what I understand, the budget is going up again this year for yet another annual increase to our mill rate. We are above 30 now with our mill rate. I don't remember a year when we have not had an increase. She went on to say, when will we be operating with a budget that does not require another hit in taxes? When will a budget be developed when we are producing revenue instead of increasing taxes? I understand the idea of wanting to give our town's residents terrific opportunities, but there has to be a point where we can't afford to do that if we don't have a revenue stream to support it. She went on to say, why does Guilford operate like it's okay to spend more than we make? When will the formula of just increasing mill rates end? When will we be making the tough decision of having to cut back so we don't have a mill rate of 31? I want to stay in this town. I want to continue to volunteer in this town. She indicated a board she's volunteering on. And if this is the financial model, she can't afford to stay here. She's respectfully asking that the board to get together and make some tough decisions on the budget. She does appreciate our time and commitment to the board. Thank you for taking the time to read the letter. I will send this to Tracy so it gets entered into the record. And again, I apologize that did not go in earlier. Okay, that being said, I'm going to scan Tracy, you and I. Is anybody at this time, would anyone like to, anyone wishing to address the Board of Finance, please raise your virtual hand. We will unmute you and state your name, address, and limit comments to no more than 3 minutes. I do see a hand up. It's Alexa Miller. I will go ahead and I think the floor is all yours.
Hello,
Alexa, Alexa Miller. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I'm Alexa Miller. I live at 201 Dromara Road, parents to children at A.W. Cox and at Baldwin. And I just wanted to express my support for the proposed budget for both the teacher residency as well as for the half-time position. I also wanted to request that in that position, that person is protected from having their time wasted from totally concerning questions if racism even exists and the kinds of obstructionist ways in which those people in those positions are often obstructed from their progress and the advancement of their work. But I want to thank the board for everything you're doing and strongly express my support. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexa. Appreciate it. Let's see. Ornella Rulo.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Chairman and members of the Board of Finance. I am here tonight to speak in strong support of the Board of Education budget. I would like to start by recognizing the tremendous amount of time, thought, and transparency that went into this Board of Ed budget. Dr. Freeman was open and forthcoming with the community. I have 3 children in Guilford Public Schools. I'm sorry, let me state my address. Excuse me. It's
Thank you.
432 Old Whitfield Street. Yes. Hence my children in the public schools. He's been very forthcoming with the community about proposed addition and changes to the budget. It was very clear throughout the whole process. I watched almost all of the Board of Ed meetings, thanks to Zoom. That Board of Ed members took each and every public comment under careful consideration. I believe this Board of Ed budget includes many tweaks that took all Guilford community concerns into account, despite working under constraints of minimal increase. So most importantly, though, I'm here tonight to share my firm support of 3 positions, new positions in the Board of Ed budget that I believe are crucial to the future health and climate of our schools. The first most is the equity officer, also the residency program, and the addition of a social worker. All 3 of these new positions speak to the commitment that Dr. Freeman and the Board of Education have to a healthy school community for all students, as well as an understanding of the importance of preparing all of our students for the next stage of adulthood they will so quickly be joining. So thank you all again for your time.
Thank you, Ornella. Chris Ford, I'm going to ask, I will unmute you, or actually you could do it yourself. There you go. Thank you. Go ahead, Chris.
Okay. Hi. Well, thank you so much for giving us this forum and listening to us and letting us speak. My name is Christine Ford, or Chris Ford. I live at 57 Graves Avenue, and I have 2 kids at Leet Elementary School. And just to echo some of the sentiments that were already shared, my family is so appreciative to the Board of Finance, the Board of Education, and all of our administrators and educators who, especially this year, are just navigating us through a lot of difficulties, but have also expressed an incredible amount of creativity and thought and collaboration in developing the proposed budget. I'm here to speak in support of that budget, and in particular, the 2 equity-related programs, the residency program and the part-time equity liaison position. I feel really strongly that the overall benefit of both of these positions in our schools is to ensure a climate of inclusion and respect for all students. This, I believe, is a critical foundation for our kids, all of our kids, as they prepare to enter the real world. I think we've all seen or saw during the mascot forums when we heard directly from recent graduates who told us that they did not feel prepared for life after Guilford. And as a vintage Guilford graduate myself, I do strongly relate to that. And in this era, where even saying the wrong thing can go viral or worse, understanding how to navigate difference and operate in an inclusive manner is a critical skill, something that these positions will provide for our community in a fiscally conservative manner. So I urge the board and our whole community to support both of these initiatives and understand their value for all of our students. Thank you.
Mike, if you're talking, I think you were muted.
Yeah, I had a coughing fit. Sorry about that. Chris, thank you. And Jennifer, I just lowered your hand so you can go ahead. I'll ask you to unmute.
Hi there. I'm Jennifer Scoggin. I live at 325 Old Seacham's Head Road. I am a parent of a child at A.W. Cox and also at Baldwin Middle School. I'm here to speak in strong support of not only Dr. Freeman's management of our schools in this unparalleled time, but also their ability to look forward to a vision of the future despite being in this very difficult place. I'm speaking in particular in response to the budget items for the Family Equity Liaison and the residency program. I think that these two efforts really equip our students with the tools to stand up to prejudice and stereotyping and bias. I myself am an educational researcher and spend a lot of time alongside teachers across the state of Connecticut thinking about equity literacy practices. And I think that Dr. Freeman's ability to imagine spaces of possibility for our students at this time and to plan for them in the budget is something that we need to, as Guilford residents, throw our support behind.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm sorry, I missed it. Did you provide your address?
I did.
Okay, I'm sorry, I missed it. I was, okay, thank you. Just want to make sure for record, that's all.
He was called.
I was,
Sorry about that.
yeah, right. Rachel Daniels.
Hi, I'm Rachel Daniels, 55 Talcott Road. I just wanted to thank everyone first for the time and effort that's gone into this process already. The work is really necessary and it's very much appreciated. I should mention I have 4 children in Guilford Public Schools. Because I need to put them all to bed, I'll be brief. I just want to strongly show my support for the 3 positions in the Board of Education budget, the equity officer, the residency program, and the addition of a social worker. I feel like these are critical to the overall well-being of our school children and our community. And I also feel that prioritizing positions such as these really illustrate what we as a community value. And I feel strongly that they should absolutely be included in the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I believe we have Emily Perilla.
Hi, Emily Perillo. I live at 83 Crestwood Drive. I have 2 students at Cox, and I'm here to echo the comments of my fellow parents. We have previously, my children attended a magnet school in Rocky Hill, and where this type of work has already started, and to see the priority in the budget for the equity funding, the positions, makes me feel proud to be in Guilford and have my students here, and hopeful for the environment that they'll be learning in and the dedication that's been shown from both the administration and the staff. So I will make my comments brief, and I really appreciate all of your time and hearing us tonight.
Thank you, Emily. Another hand just went up. Sorry, I have A. Noni. I'll lower a hand and.
Yes, thank you. I'm calling in support also of the budget and the need to create these positions. You know, if you need a reminder as to why these positions are needed, you know, there is, you know, lots of headlines that Guilford has been in the past few years since I've moved into town. And, you know, let's see here. In September 24th, 2019, Hartford Current, Guilford High School student wore blackface to football game against Hartford team. And July 10th, 2017, racist graffiti turns up again in Guilford 2 times in 3 weeks against Asians. In 2016, a school climate survey in which students in grade 4 through 12 polled disagreed with the statement on question 21, quote, students in their school respect each other's differences such as gender, race, sexual orientation, etc. 1 in 4 students in grades 5 through 12 disagreed that. Let's see, what else? Vandals destroying new sensory garden at Roses for Autism, patch.com, June 14th, 2017. You know, it's been in the headlines, it's been constant. It's something that needs to end, and this is the way to start tearing that down. It shouldn't be in the headlines. It shouldn't be in our town. Our town has no place for racism, for any kind of discrimination, and this is going to help it, and shame on anybody that tries to stop it.
Thank you. Before you go, though, I don't think, could you please state your name and address for record? Thank you for your
I
comments.
will not, because I wish to remain anonymous as a person that is not part of the 90% of white residents in this town.
Very well. Okay. Anybody else wishing to address the Board of Finance public forum?
So Mike, I've got, 4 emails that got forwarded today that I didn't hear mention of any of them.
Or that
Maybe
were just, that just went to you?
No, I forwarded them to Tracy when I got them.
You just forwarded one, right, Jonathan? It just came.
Yeah, yep,
Yeah.
another one, yeah.
Well, then what I'm going to have to, if they went to you and you're just getting them, I am not aware of them, but they need to be part of the public record if they've been submitted. Unfortunately, that's
Yeah,
usually
these have
what
been coming in over the last few hours. I don't know when I started, a little earlier today, shooting them over when
I did add 2 onto the board pack that you sent me, Jonathan. There are 2
Okay.
on there.
I just didn't hear mention of any of them. And I know you're aware of them. They come with a very lengthy letter.
I apologize. In preparation for this meeting, I missed them. They are very lengthy.
Chairman,
Very lengthy.
2 on the.
One is 7 pages long. So well, it's from Susan Weber Miller, 73 Fair Street. I cannot read this in the record because it's well more than 3 minutes.
Why don't we just read 3 minutes?
I'll tell you what. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll read the first couple of sentences. That's all I can do.
Why don't we read 3 minutes of it? I don't think it's fair that you've got probably 4 emails supporting this letter.
Okay, that's fine.
And,
that's fine.
We don't
I'll do
put it into the record and make people aware of it.
I will go as far as I can. Dated 3/4/2021, Guilford Board of Finance, subject opposition to the proposed 2021 Board of Ed budget. Got that. As a lifelong, this is, I mentioned the name, right? I got to keep scrolling, but I mentioned the name. Susan Weber Miller, 73 Fair Street. Please hold. As a lifelong resident and concerned Guilford taxpayer, I am opposed to the proposed Board of Education budget increase overall, but specifically I want to call out some fiscally irresponsible requests. There's absolutely no need to add a head count for a family equity officer position for $25,000, 10 hours a week, nor is there a need for a $37,350 stipend for a teacher residency program. Neither line item should be funded with taxpayer money. The former has zero necessity, as our existing Guilford Public Schools psychologists and social workers can handle any cases for marginal groups or individuals. Dr. Freeman admitted there are no current cases, and in addition, cited that Guilford Public Schools will be losing 100 students next year as town K-12 student counts are declining. The latter is a completely racist request. There are teachers of all races that may not be able to afford to live in Guilford, not just minorities or teachers of color. Also, most Guilford teachers do not live in Guilford today, and it is not a requirement that teachers live in the town that they teach us in. Furthermore, Guilford soon will offer low-income housing across from the Henry Whitfield House, and that should provide more than ample affordable housing for minority teachers that may be hired that need additional financial assistance. I will read half of this paragraph, and then I will read the closing.
You're at 1.5 minutes.
Another major concern, and the primary reason I am not in favor of supporting an increase in the Board of Education budget, is the political indoctrination that is being imposed by the current education program in the name of hard history or social justice. Both are terms Dr. Freeman uses to support the state of Connecticut social studies curricula. How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi is the book that was purchased with Guilford taxpayer money by Dr. Freeman for $6,000 last year and given to every teacher as required reading. As pointed out at the last Board of Finance meeting, Dr. Freeman uses the professional development budget line item to fund his social justice agenda, which is code for the very controversial and politically leftist critical race theory, or 1619 project. Why was this particular book required reading? There's 5 more pages. I will read the end. I realize the Board of Finance cannot dictate what is taught in our public schools, but you can certainly make sure no money is spent promoting anything construed as politically charged. What am I at for time?
2 minutes and 37 seconds.
I think we get the gist of it. Because we have another email here from Patricia Todd.
I think it's the same thing, Mr. Chairman. It's the same letter multiple times from different people.
Well, the one that I have here, hold on. Patricia Todd.
They've added comments on the bottom.
It's very short. This one I have no problem reading. Dear Jonathan, please add my name to the bottom of Susan Weber's letter pointing out the fiscally irresponsible request from the Board of Education. See attached. There is no attachment to this, but it was her letter. I could not possibly add to Susan's letter nor rewrite it. I feel that it says everything necessary to alert the Board of Finance and the Board of Education to what is going on in our Guilford schools. I totally support the 1776 project. That is, let's bring back patriotism to our schools. Let's make our children proud to be Americans, not ashamed. Are there any other letters that need to be entered in that I'm not aware of?
I think Mr. Chairman did just send one from Deborah Demusis.
Jonathan, why don't you read it? If it keeps to the 3 minutes, please.
Let me see if I can find that one.
Megan, do you have it in front of you?
Yes.
I do not.
The one you just.
I've got tons of paperwork and everything, and if I go to my email right now, I will probably crash my system. So, but I do see hands up. Actually, Megan, do you have it right there? Otherwise,
Yeah. So it's the letter that you read initially.
I found it as well.
Is attached, and then Deborah Demusis, 18 Sugarloaf Road, Guilford. She just writes, I forward this letter and agree with the contents of this letter. Please respond that you received this email, Deborah.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other letters? I do see hands up, so don't worry, I will get to you. All right. What
I believe the last one was from Michelle Bowe, and if memory serves me, I think it was also in support of Miss Weber's letter.
Okay. That's fair. All of these will be entered for record. They need to be for the minutes. All right. Based on the order that I see hands, again, I'd like to remind everyone, name, address, and 3 minutes, please. I see Sewell Golden.
Hi, thanks. Sewell Golden, 645 Tanner Marsh Road. I wanted to echo what Anonymous said about the Guilford headlines, because when I go to other towns outside of Guilford, I do get oh, you're from there, because that's the impression that people get of Guilford when they read these headlines about high school students being ill-equipped with about cultural competency. So the pandemic has wreaked havoc on us all, but the truth within this global tragedy is the majority of us in Guilford have more. I've noted our kids still get extracurricular activities when entire school districts like our neighboring New Haven have largely remained closed. I've commiserated with neighbors about being shut in when we are shut into our 2,000 to 4,000 square foot single family homes with yards, parks, and hiking trails close by. As a community, we are privileged, and it's important, especially now, to acknowledge that. As a town, we are 90% white. 99% of our teachers and administrators are white, while the country is only 60% white. I don't see why diversity initiatives are enacted only when students reach college. They should start from the beginning. If leading colleges, ones we'd all love to see our children attend, are pouring resources into equity, diversity, and inclusion. Why aren't we? By continuing to fail to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, we are actually failing our children. Parents on the shoreline wake up at 4:30 a.m. to drive their kids to before school hockey practice, invest in private tutors, horseback riding, and gymnastics. Our community center and library are well-maintained and welcoming as any pricey B&B. Our town beach is the ocean. This past year, as a country, we watched Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd suffer untimely deaths in the middle of a pandemic, which glued us to the news even more than before. Many more people joined the Black Lives Matter movement, including many people in Guilford. So I'm not saying give up your horses or your library, but I am saying make an actionable change, potentially one you may have wished you made during the civil rights movement. We can talk about diversity outside of human population. We can talk about biodiversity. We can talk about different colors of the rainbow. We can talk about how a garden might feel if it is all daisies versus a garden with lilacs, poppies, lily of the valley, dahlia, hyacinth, allium, marigolds, morning glory. Some like it warmer, some colder. They grow up from bulbs or propagate from rhizomes. Some perennial, some annual. But their unique shapes and color, smell and texture contribute to a miraculous vision of a healthier soil and ecosystem. Now, a metaphor can only get us so far. My support to further EDI in Guilford is as much for my own kids as it is for anyone else's. I hope that many in town can have a change of heart, speak up if they were afraid to, and embrace the ever-changing future for our own children's sake.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Next up, I see Lisa Kelly.
Hi, Lisa Kelly, 1898 Jennifer's Drive. I have a second grader at Cox and an incoming kindergartner. I'm speaking up tonight to support the position of an equity officer, as well as the investment in the residency program and the social worker position. I'd also like to take this moment just to rebut the point in the letter from Susan Weber. Low-income housing does not equal minority housing, and to say so is offensive, and rather proves the point that there is evidence that there is need for these initiatives that I'm speaking in support of tonight. So I echo all the excellent points made before me, and I thank our administrators, the Board of Education, and Board of Finance for their consideration and time.
Thank you, Ms. Kelly. I have Bob. Bob, I'm going to lower your hand, name, address, comment.
Bob Harrington, 464 Granite Road. Lisa beat me to it. I kind of wanted to rebut Susan Miller's point that low-income housing would allow for minority housing, because that is clearly why we need an equity position. I'm part of a biracial family, and this is something, just listening to just those parts of the letter, it's very clear to me that it's something that we need, because there are too many people who blinded by their own whiteness and can't see the things that happen to people who aren't them. And this is for the people who are experiencing it, people who are not white, who need the equity that they need, and it's for the people who need to see what they would otherwise be blind to. I mean, it's for the good of everybody.
Thank you, Bob.
That's all I got.
Appreciate the comments. Elizabeth Wilson, I will lower your hand and name, address, comment.
I'm Elizabeth Wilson, 27 Hazel Road. There are 6 houses on my street. 4 of the houses, we all mow our own lawns. The 2 who do not mow their own lawns are elderly. 5 out of the 6 houses, we all clean our own houses. We don't have housekeepers to come in. And the one person who does is 90. My concern is not about the specific line items in the Board of Education budget. My perspective is taking the trends for the past 6 years plus what is coming for next year. So enrollment in Guilford Public Schools has declined 9.4% since the 2014-2015 school year, which is when construction began on the new high school. Superintendent Freeman has forecasted an additional decline of 3.6% in the upcoming year. That means school enrollment will have declined 12.7%, or 431 fewer students in 7 years. We've experienced a decline in enrollment every year for the past 7 years. During the same time period, the cost per student has increased 27.5%, which is almost 2.5 times the rate of inflation. So we've gone from $16,508 per student 6 years ago to $21,040 with this upcoming budget. Demographics in the state of Connecticut have been changing as our population becomes older. Connecticut's Legislative Commission on Aging estimates that 30% of Guilford's population will be age 65 or older in 4 years. The shoreline in Litchfield County are experiencing this aging faster than any other areas of the state. And this is not a Guilford-only phenomenon, but a statewide situation. And there's currently no expected reversal of this trend. We're in the middle of a pandemic and the worst economic crisis in the past 90 years. Last Tuesday, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell told the Senate Banking Committee that the economy remains hobbled, the economic recovery remains uneven and far from complete, and the path ahead is highly uncertain. I believe that we should take the 2014-15 level of spending per student, increase it by the inflation rate, and multiply it by the expected school enrollment, which would mean a Board of Education budget of $54,630,000, which is a $7.8 million decrease from the proposed budget. And this would mean an approximate 7% reduction in taxes for every Guilford taxpayer. And once again, I'm very appreciative of all the time and energy and thought that people have done in service to our community.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Anybody else wishing to address the Board of Finance in public forum? And I will do this quick, going once, going twice, moving on. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. I very much appreciate it on behalf of the board. So let's move on to item number 2. At this time, as I have done in the past, I would like to provide a brief recap as my iPad decides to go crazy. Brief recap on where we are on the budget, on the revenue projections, on the anticipated mill rate, and bonding recommendations since we were last together on Tuesday. This will be a quick summary, trust me. The Town Board of Selectmen has requested an operating budget of $32,402,871, or a 3.13% increase over last year. The town debt service budget request of $10,420,988 is a 0.71% decrease from last year. The Board of Education has requested an operating budget of $62,528,459, or a 1.49% increase over last year. And therefore, with all those numbers added up, the total budget increase requested is $105,269,759, or a 1.77% increase over last fiscal year. On the revenue side, projected non-tax revenue will be decreasing $665,982. And this is largely due to 2 line items. There's a major reduction in interest income, and a non-reliance on the unassigned fund balance. In addition, the grand list has increased 1.42%, and it's one of the largest increases we've seen in several years. And so based on all of these factors, the projected mill rate tax would be 32, mill rate would be 32.66, which is up from 32.31, or a 1.1% increase over last year, which I would remind us, everybody on the call, that last year it was 8.87% mill rate increase. On the bonded capital project requests, our board has received some revised numbers to review and approve tonight. The Board of Education is requesting, based on some changes downward in their authorization amount from Tuesday night, and this request is now at $6,172,609. The projects include, talk about not being prepared for what the projects include. There we go. I got my sheet now. The projects include, and I won't go too much into the number detail, but the stadium turf field, we can discuss this all later. Stadium turf field, Guilford Lakes HVAC upgrades, Cox boiler replacement, Melissa Jones elevator upgrades, and architectural and engineering future services for future projects. Also, that includes bond issuance costs. On the town vehicle replacement and facilities improvements request, we got those numbers today, and it's been finalized at $4,497,012. The items included in this requested amount are Public Works dump trucks, two dump trucks, General Road reconstruction, Chimney Corners coastal resilience, Lake Quanapog Dam, Public Safety Storage Building, Fire Department training facility, library slate roof replacement, Public Works fuel tank replacement, and bond issuance costs included in that. As we all know, the backup documents to everything I've just read are on our board pack, on our iPads, and I do just very quickly want to take a moment and thank Mary Jane, Tracy, and the town departments for very quickly getting us this information and uploading it in a very prompt fashion, as prompt as they possibly could. But I do want to thank you. I was scanning them all late this afternoon, making sure I didn't miss anything, and I'm sure we were all doing the same, but it was a lot of work to do that, so thank you. That being all said, let us begin with the discussion. Let's begin with questions, as we always do. I'm going to begin with questions that we have as a board for the Board of Education and Superintendent Freeman and Chairwoman Bell Stracy regarding their requested budget and capital bonding request. Jonathan, I know that you kind of left it last meeting that you had a number of questions. I appreciate that. I have a number of questions myself. I'm sure we all do. So I'm going to ask you if you'd like to start the questioning of the Board of Education, but I do want all the board members to kind of rotate through so we could all ask questions. So maybe ask a couple of questions, and then we'll go through and ask everybody to get a fair shake at firing away at the Board of Education. So Jonathan, if you'd like to start, seeing that you had you wanted to ask a bunch of them last meeting.
So, Mr. Chairman, before I dwell in on the perhaps questions specific to the BOE,
yeah,
would it be possible to start to frame a discussion on what I think is probably the biggest issue facing taxpayers? Obviously, in my opinion, which would, I believe, cross over to the BOS and to the BOE.
If it's concerning the Board of Education, I do want to stick to a format. If you want to say a comment about it, I mean, this is part of the discussion. I
can save that.
As long as it has to do with the Board of Education and we go into questions. I don't want to veer off too far.
It's up to you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask the question at some point, but I could save it till the end and stick to some questions specific to the BOE.
Why don't we stick to the BOE?
Okay.
And then the Board of Selectmen, and then we'll open it up. Okay.
All right. Give me just a moment here.
As
Okay, I wanted to pose
Right.
some
Go ahead.
questions to the BOE about some of the hiring that is proposed in this budget cycle. So I came up with some back of the envelope calculations. I don't think I got a perfect amount, but I think if the BOE were to refrain from hiring any new positions, it could reduce the budget by approximately $250,000. So, a big general question would be, given the challenging economic climate that our residents find themselves caught up in, would the BOE consider holding off on creating any new positions or doing any new hiring until we have like a stronger post-COVID-19 economic recovery, perhaps next budget cycle, hopefully sooner or in that time frame?
Dr. Balistraci, if it's okay with you, I'll start that answer. Usually we wait to see who steps toward the podium. It's hard to do that in a Zoom meeting. So, Mr. Trotta, my quick answer would be no, right? So you're talking about waiting for a post-COVID financial environment, but we have our students who are moving through a COVID educational environment and will be moving into a post-COVID educational environment. The positions that we have woven into the district, into the budget proposal in front of you, are positions like you heard people speak to tonight. It is a school social worker position. It is a part-time equity position. The art and the world language positions at the elementary level involve no new monies. There are no dollars attached to the increase of the art teachers because there's a direct offset in the elementary schedule with those world language teachers. So if you asked us to take those two positions out, we would in fact be reducing programming to the elementary students. I do want to remind the board and the community that the overall budget package in front of you is a reduction in teaching positions, a 0.7 FTE reduction. So I know I've mentioned this before, we are repurposing human resources to better address the needs of the students in this unique year. We don't consider any of that new hiring. Now, I understand your point. If we took the reductions that we identified related to the enrollment decrease and then didn't add any of these in, would it result in a lower budget? Of course it would, but we don't believe that it would responsibly meet the needs of our students moving forward.
So
I would only add, if I may, that the board is fully in support of these positions. Dr. Freeman has mentioned, as many speakers have tonight, the three we've heard most frequently is the new social worker, a part-time equity officer, and a residency program, which is actually not a new position, right? That is in fact filling an existing position. There is also an IT person that we're bringing on as well, and it would be really hard to argue that this is not an important position. We have spent a year navigating technology and with students in various phases of remote learning. So these are really important positions as we move forward and really respond to the needs of our particular students.
And really,
yeah, so I'm aware that you're
position...
requesting these positions in the current budget cycle. That's what's driving my question. So as a follow-up, though, would it be fair to say that in the past we've had economic downturns and hardships that were of a smaller magnitude than what we're facing now, and we have asked staff for concessions and showed more restraint in hiring for economic circumstances that were not even of this magnitude? Is that fair to say, or is that not true?
Are you talking about union concessions?
I'm talking about concessions in showing restraint in hiring and asking teachers unions, for instance, not to take raises or to take smaller raises because of economic circumstances. I'm looking at economic circumstances right now, according to a lot of what I read, as being the worst economic circumstances for our country since the Great Depression. And I don't feel like the board is recognizing that.
So, Jonathan, I think that the board has shown enormous restraint in bringing in the budget that we brought in here. I have said in a number of my public presentations that I could make a wholehearted and sincere argument that this budget should be a 3% increase. Jonathan, this is not only an Mr. Trotta, this is not only an unprecedented economic crisis, it is an unprecedented educational crisis. We have never taken our schools or our children through anything like this. And to suggest that cutting the services and the resources to those students in this moment in time is responsible, I just need to suggest is wrong. We brought in what we thought was a budget that was balanced in both directions. It is enormously aware of the financial crisis that this community finds itself in, and yet it is committed to continuing to meet the needs of children who sit in our classrooms. And the argument about the financial crisis, every employee in this school system is recognizing that same employment crisis. To ask the employees of the Guilford Public Schools, whether those are secretaries, custodians, paraprofessionals, or teachers, to set aside the raise in this year, every single one of those employees has worked beyond the contract that they signed with us, and every single one of them is living through this crisis the same as everybody else. They have spouses who have lost employment. They have childcare needs that have increased. I think this is absolutely the wrong year to look at our workforce who has cared for our children and ask them to set aside those contractually agreed to increases. It's why this budget is the lowest budget that has ever come from the leadership team to the Board of Education in my tenure in the school system. We brought forward the thinnest budget we have ever brought forward in the midst of an unprecedented educational crisis. I think that shows our awareness of the financial crisis as well.
See, I still have a difficult time with the additional hiring. I look at the contrast between the public sector and the private sector. Most businesses are laying off people. There's furloughs. A lot of entrepreneurs are forced to close their doors because of these shutdowns, and it just does not seem like an appropriate time to add positions. Admittedly, you could convince me that additional art time is a positive. I wouldn't argue that, but is it essential for this moment in time? Is that a crisis?
To that point again, Mr. Trotta, the art time is not additional. We are taking the art time out of existing world language time. That is nothing extra that those students are gaining. We are simply moving the programming out of world language and into art. That is
I'm discussing a hypothetical where you don't have any additional hiring. You just take the decreases and not have the increases.
Again, my point would be that this year of all years is the wrong year to decrease educational programming. Our students have had less than full-time contact for a year now. To say that this is the right year to take away educational programming and supports, I believe is wrong-headed. Now, I'm standing here advocating for the educational program in this town. That's my job. That's what I've been hired to do. I believe that we are assuming that position of advocacy wholly aware of the financial realities as well. We don't come here tonight blind to those.
So with residents facing the worst economic circumstances since the Great Depression, what possible scenario would make you think that maybe we should show restraint and not have any additional hires?
Again, I'm going to say we showed enormous restraint. I'm sorry, Dr. Balistraci.
No, Mr. Trotta. I mean, I don't think that hypotheticals are a worthy focus of discussion right now. The reality is that
I'm not sure what's
Dr. Freeman brought to us a budget.
Can you stop there for a second though? I don't understand. What's hypothetical? Do you not think we're facing?
I'm sorry, I'm reacting to your question. If hypothetically we had a different situation, all I'm suggesting,
are you saying
we
it's
may
not
disagree
to not have additional hires? That's only an unthinkable hypothetical possibility. Like we could easily say we're going to have a hiring freeze because we're having really difficult economic circumstances for our town and its residents. I don't think that's beyond what's doable and allowable. This isn't even wrapped up in union contracts.
I'll answer the question, and I think we may find ourselves at simply a point of disagreement. I think that's what has been stated is that We find ourselves with two very important competing situations right now, both caused by the same pandemic. One is a community that is impacted by that financially. Another is a student body who has not been in school 5 days a week in 1 year. Some of who have been in,
Self-imposed, though.
excuse me, I'm going to ask you not to interrupt me.
All right, fair enough.
Half of the population who has been in a hybrid model since September and is thankfully going back to 4 days a week in a week and a half. These are students who have needs, some of which we're only going to recognize once we have them entirely back in our school buildings. And we have identified positions that we think are going to be extremely important to support those needs.
Jonathan, I'm going to step in for a second. Definitely appreciate, always appreciate opinions on all of our board members, okay? I think that this has been asked and answered, and I think Dr. Balistraci may have a point. There might be a point where there's an agree to disagree. I do want to allow you the time to ask another question, but then I want to move it on to allow others on the board to ask questions of the Board of Education. So do you have anything further regarding that, or do you have?
I'll just move on to just another topic if it's all right. I've got a question
Okay.
We'll take a little break from that one.
Move on to that question, then I'd like to seek other questions from the board. Thank you.
My next question centers around our medical expenses. And I think this is like a very important issue facing our taxpayers. And what I'm seeing is that it's a difficult budget item to budget for. There's no doubt about it. The costs of medical are very volatile, and a high degree of conservatism needs to be applied. However, I'm seeing a pattern develop that looks like it's essentially a 3-year pattern, if not even maybe a 4-year pattern, where we have generated very sizable, I would say from a budget standpoint, material surpluses in our medical account because we have overstated our costs for medical. I don't believe we've done this intentionally, but we've seen this surplus occur now, I believe, over 4 years. I think we've seen a small surplus in 2018, but a budget surplus of about 1.5 million. Then in 2019, a surplus from the medical account of 1.2 million and a surplus in the budget of $2 million. Then in 2020, if I've got these numbers estimated fairly well, we had a $3.3 million surplus in our medical account and a $2 million surplus in our budget. And that was really because we actually withdrew some money from the medical surplus for some other purposes. Now, in the year that we're approaching to close out here in June for 2021, I think we're running at about $1.3 million surplus with our fund up to about $7 million. So I have some serious concerns that we do need to, with caution, adjust our medical contributions so that we're not, in my opinion, overtaxing our residents for medical. And we're coming a little closer to our actual costs as opposed to running these extremely large surpluses. And I wonder if the Board of Education may be open to that. I have seen that there is a decrease in medical. I believe decrease was maybe 85,000 or so. But would you consider that we could even go further and still be on a conservative grounds, considering this pattern that's developed over the last 3 years?
So the pattern in the Board of Education
and I
budgeting.
Apologize, that was a long question.
It's all right. I give a lot of long answers.
Yes.
The pattern at the Board of Education for medical spending is that our spend this year is below what it was in 14-15 levels. The board has negotiated with all of our bargaining groups. We work collaboratively with an insurance consultant and the town side. I would respectfully suggest that this is a conversation for the back end because we do that work collaboratively with the town officials. I wouldn't want to comment individually on the school budget around that. We work with our our consultant and we come to those numbers, and the board has shown a history of declining costs associated with those costs in the last several years.
This is really a town and a school issue
I
combined.
agree.
And
Yes, I apologize. It is, but I wanted to present it to both boards, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Equity.
Yeah,
Board of
I'm just uncomfortable answering it alone for the school system. It's something that we do collaboratively as a whole town.
maybe that same question could be asked to the town. And Mary Jane. or Matt
Indeed, when the
can
time
answer.
is right.
Yeah. All right, I do want to move others on the Board of Finance who I did, by the way, before we go on, I did see somebody's hand go up, and I just want to remind those that are on the call or in the meeting that this is a discussion workshop with the Board of Finance and discussing the budget. There is no public input in this. It's just board members. So I just don't want anybody putting up their hand and thinking they were being ignored. That's all. Board members, anybody else? Board of Education budget. And go ahead. You should all be just chime in. I don't think you have to raise your hand unless you talk at the same time.
I have one.
Ken, go ahead.
All right, I think that I'm looking down the line and going beyond the 21-22 budget to say the 22-23 and beyond. My question to Dr. Freeman is this: do you see any increase in need right now? In other words, have you provided us with an overly modest proposal in terms of these issues that have come up repeatedly from the public and from Mr. Trotter? In other words, are you seeing some of these needs that are expressed in the budget expanding in the next year? For example, we have one social worker earmarked for the high school. Are there other social workers in planning? Are you thinking of additions in any one of these areas like equity or technology or any of the other areas that have been cut back? Are you thinking of holding your fire and coming back at us with additional things in the coming year? In other words, are we just handling the tip of the iceberg here?
I think that's a really thoughtful question, Mr. Gammerman. I think to Dr. Balistraci's point, we don't know what next year is going to hold for us. And anybody who tells you they do is lying. We've never been through something like this educationally before. We believe that we have the right pieces in place to begin returning our students to school next year. But we're going to learn a lot as students return. I often complain about the way that public education is structured in annual budget requests, and that we can only come 1 year at a time. In this moment in time, I think that may be a benefit, because this is going to be a quickly moving and developing scenario. We would not be standing here in front of you tonight if we didn't believe that this budget proposal met the needs of our students. It is absolutely conservative. Again, I could make an argument for more to be in this budget. But to Mr. Trotta's point, we recognize that we are balancing concerns. However, it would be educational malpractice to stand here and say that there are gaps that we don't think are addressed, and we're just holding our breath and hoping that nobody notices. It is a responsible budget. It is a complete budget. It is conservative. And yes, I can guarantee that next year we will be in front of you talking about new needs and how to address those needs. But I can also guarantee that as we did this year, we will look to declines in enrollment and find areas where offsetting savings could be invested into those new needs before we ask for new dollars. We've done it every year and we will continue to do it. And it's why this year you can identify several new positions, but the net is also a decrease in teachers. We will have fewer teachers next year than we have this year when you look at the bottom line, because we really look carefully at that creativity and that flexibility.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions as people figure out what they want to ask. One regarding the total athletic spend. That was up I don't remember the percentages, but I do know that there was 60, it was up $60,000. I think it was, I want to say it was 50,000 last year and 110 ask for this budget. I remember hearing something along the lines of it was really $200,000 that was needed, but you're only asking for 60 to phase it in. Could you talk a little bit more about that athletic spend?
Yeah, a significant portion of that athletic spend is in fact costs associated with the rebranding of the high school from the Guilford High School Indians to the Guilford Grizzlies. It's important to note that there are no new coaching positions in the budget this year. We're not expanding with new sport offerings. However, we did make a decision as a community and as a school system to change the mascot. There are some dollars in that budget to begin the process of offsetting those costs. We didn't include the whole cost, again, because we wanted to be sensitive to the community. We believe that we can offset some of that cost through fundraising. We believe that people are going to want to get their Grizzly t-shirts and their Grizzly hoodies, and we will raise money with that new branding to help offset the cost of also purchasing new uniforms for the school athletes who compete under that banner. Additionally, we know that we may not be able to do this all at once. We know that we may need to phase in some uniform renewal over time. We will not put students out on a court or a field wearing a jersey that says Indians any longer, but we may need to, for another season or two, continue to wear a pair of shorts that have a relatively discreet G that still has feathers on it until we can absorb those costs through fundraising or spread those costs over a number of different budget requests.
Great. Thank you for that. We've heard numerous times, actually, our last 3 meetings, some comments from the public regarding the budget in terms of 3.2 or 3.2 million dollar reduction. It was based on the enrollment, the inflation rate, and the number of students. There's 2 things that I wanted to ask. One is the actual possibility or procedure when it comes to reducing a budget even close to that amount, which is a $7.2 million reduction. I'm bringing it up because I know that there's a minimum budget reduction for the by the state.
Right.
That there's a restriction. I was wondering if you could mention that or talk about why you can't really go down 7.2% or 7.2 million. And then secondarily, what that would look like in terms of, if you've got 85% of your budget is people and staff and benefits, it's the people. What would it look like if you had a $7.2 million reduction in your budget?
Dr. Balistraci, would you like me to start with that one as well? I've actually thought about that.
Go ahead. Thank you.
So, Mr. Ailes, you're right. First, we would have to look to state statute around the minimum budgetary requirement. School districts, local school districts are prohibited from reducing their educational investment below the previous year in most cases. There are exceptions that are carved out for enrollment declines, and there's a formula for how you calculate that. For us to stay within the boundaries of an acceptable reduction, we would not be able to go as high as 7.8 million. We would have to look at 5 past years of actual enrollment. We would have to conduct the calculation based on per student expenditure and that decline. And there's a number that you can come in below zero. It's not $7.8 million below zero. To begin talking about a decrease of that magnitude, $7.8 million request, that's 11% of our budget. It's close to 12% of our budget. You're right that 85% of our budget is invested in the people who work in the schools. A reduction of that magnitude would probably, and again, most of our employees are teachers. Of the 600 folks we have employed in the system, over 315 of them are teachers. So you would be looking at the necessity of completely reprogramming and increasing class sizes. There would be no way to absorb that reduction without making that base calculation. In addition to needing to cut programs and resources in other areas, I would I would conservatively suggest that that would be a reduction at a minimum of 60 full-time teaching positions. You'd have approximately 20 falling at the high school, 10 at each of the middle schools, and 5 at each of the elementary schools. The quickest way to look at what that will do to class size is that in any of our first, second, third, fourth grade classrooms, the most common number of students in those the most common number of sections in those settings is 3. So in an area where we have 3 third grade classrooms, we would be reducing to 2, and we would be doing that in all schools at all grade levels. Same logic would be applied at the middle schools. In each of the 2 middle schools, you've got 6 teams that are servicing 2 grade levels. You'd see 2 full teams pulled out, and you'd have, so you're looking at increases of 1/3 in class size across the district. That doesn't get to the full 7.8 million. There would then on top of that need to be programmatic reductions. We would not be continuing to offer 36 different after-school varsity athletic programs. Those would need to be curtailed. You would see drastic reductions in support positions similar to the ones that you heard referenced tonight, support around student mental health, but additionally and importantly, around things like teacher effectiveness. There would be drastic reductions to the professional development budgeting, and specifically to what we refer to as the daily job embedded professional development that is now taken on by the instructional coaches. In past years, I have argued that the instructional coaches are one of the single most important investments that we've made in teacher effectiveness and therefore student success. And you would not be able to continue to fund that, to staff that support at the levels. It would be dramatically reduced, if not eliminated completely.
Thank you for the answer. I appreciate it. I do have another question, but I'm going to let others chime in. Anybody else in the Board of Finance?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Ailes. Mr. Ailes, I'm sorry. I noted that the MBR doesn't allow you to reduce below that level. Should you go below the level, what you would lose is your educational cost sharing grant support from the state of Connecticut. In Guilford, that is $1.7 million annually. So if we were to violate the MBR guidelines, the state would withhold that $1.7 million that they invest in our system in Guilford.
Okay.
That's an important point that I failed to mention it.
Thank you for the clarification. Other board members?
Yeah, anytime you want, Mike. I've got a few questions in the ready.
Actually, I have a question, Mr. Chairman.
Megan.
So I guess I have 2 very hopefully simple questions for you, Dr. Freeman. So I know there's an increase to the tuition line. Obviously, special education has been difficult this year, right, in terms of delivering those services. Do you think that you actually have enough in that line item this year to be able to cover those overall costs? I know that's always a questionable line, but is that a realistic number that you have in there right now?
Yes, short of having a crystal ball, that remains a realistic number. It's also one of the lowest tuition increases that we've seen in some time. So what we do every year is that we look to the real students who we know will be moving up 1 grade in our system, and we budget the actual costs that we know are associated for those students. We then try to build in a reasonable contingency. The reasonable contingency that we've built in this year is similar to what we built in last year. We didn't add additional COVID contingency on top of that. And again, to Dr. Balistraci's point, we just don't know. We do believe, however, that in Guilford, the primary supports for students returning next year are going to be our classroom teachers. And to the question we just answered, class size is going to be the single most important variable in supporting all of our students because they've all gone through this experience together. So the suggestion that raising class sizes would be appropriate this year, again, I'm going to advocate for the educational needs of this community. I would probably not be in favor of increasing class sizes by 1/3 any year, to be frank and to be honest. But to suggest it this year, there couldn't be a worse year. The single most important supports for our children moving forward next year will be their classroom teachers in reasonably sized classrooms, and we offer those now. This budget didn't increase class size. It maintained class size because that's going to be enormously important next year for the academic achievement, but also for the social, emotional, and mental health of our students next year.
Thank you. And then I just had a quick question on the supply. I know maybe this is something that the Board of Finance we talked about, but you mentioned frugal management of supplies. Obviously, we don't want teachers to have to go out and buy supplies. So when you say frugal management, you mean that they have enough in this budget, right? That they're not going to have to subsidize out of their own pocket, but that you're just managing and efficiently managing that moving forward. I just don't want to see us approve a budget that then teachers have to go out and buy.
Yes, thank you. We believe that we are doing it efficiently and that we are doing it right with a very sharp pencil, but not irresponsibly. We are not looking to push these costs off on our teachers. Last thing we would want to do.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Ken, go ahead. I see your finger up.
Yes, I'd raise the rest of my hand if I could. Quick question, Dr. Freeman. Do you feel, I mean, this is a question we could ask the President of the United States, but we're asking you. Do you feel you have enough money built into the budget to manage the contributions we have to make ourselves for COVID relief support?
Can you expand on that, Mr. Gamerman? Do you mean the contributions that families make in their children's education?
No, the COVID, your set aside within the budget for costs that the Guilford Board of Education has to invest in providing COVID relief. Beyond in federal, as best we can determine them, we can't determine them with any precision, of course.
Two different questions. So for this budget year, no. We have told the Board of Finance that we expect that we may need to come to you for a special appropriation this year because this budget that we're in the current year was approved before the scope of the pandemic was recognized. We are carefully monitoring the support that is coming to us from the federal level. Yes, again, I'm going to say that there's a lot of unknowns. I need to put an asterisk over every confident response I give. But at this time, we are confident that we built a budget that will meet our needs next year. And we're also confident that if we can't see around this particular corner and we come up short, that we know we have a town and a Board of Finance and a Board of Selectmen who support the children of this community. And we've taken great pride in the last 20 years of not ever having to come to you for a special appropriation. I hope that this year is a one-off and that we don't need to be back next year. But if we needed to, I would rather build a responsible budget that comes up short and have to come to you, the Board of Finance, requesting a special appropriation, than build a budget that builds in contingencies that unnecessarily tax the taxpayers and then learn that we don't need that contingency. So I'd rather have to come back to you, the Board of Finance, than build in a lot of buffer and find out we don't need that buffer. And Mr. Trotta, that may be the only thing that you and I agree on tonight.
Can I piggyback on that, Jeff, real quick? Jeff, I saw your hand go up. Can I just real quick, because it was going to be one of my questions. I know you don't have a number, and what we're talking, we've been talking about this every single meeting about the anticipated need that you may be coming back to us. I did want to just go to how the Board of Education may affect our unassigned fund balance coming in the coming months. Is there a range, a low and a high range that you'd be looking at, or is it just still too early to tell anything like that?
I think we can give you a high range and then tell you that we think we can work back from that. So we have been tracking unanticipated. Now, again, we're talking about this current budget year.
I shifted gears to this year, but it could have an effect on how we make our decisions.
Right. So we are certainly tracking unanticipated and unbudgeted expenses related to COVID. Right. We could probably say that those are going to run as high as $2.5 million of unbudgeted expense this year. However, We know that we have received CARES money and we have received ESSER 1 money, and we will receive some ESSER 2 monies. We know that some of those costs may be able to be pushed through FEMA. We know that last year we returned over $300,000, we believe, unexpended to the coffers. And we know that through this year, while we're seeing unanticipated costs because of the COVID mitigations, that there were other areas where we've worked really hard to keep costs down. And so it won't be as high as that. I can't see Mrs. Trudeau on my particular screen. I don't know if she's chewing her fingernails while I'm saying this to you. These are very early projections, right? I'm not putting numbers to them, but that's the way that we're working. We're tracking the unanticipated expenses that we did incur this year around additional custodians, around additional health aides, around PPE, around plexiglass dividers, around some increased teaching positions to help bring those class sizes down, all unanticipated expenses. But then we're whittling those away. And I know that it was last year's dollars, but when we account for that, we'll start by showing what we gave back unexpended from last year's budget. We'll tally up what we're receiving from those various support programs, and then we will add to that other monies this year that were left unspent that offset that, and we'll have some kind of shortfall. I'm still confident we will have some form of shortfall. I just can't give you much more scope beyond that.
It's a fair response. I will accept that. I know it was I know we've been, we're living with this every month that we talk about it. So, and well, you're living with it and you're telling us as you know. So thank you. That's fine for now. Thank you. Jeff, you had your hand up.
Yep. The technical integration specialist, how much of that is kind of catching up from where we should have been before the pandemic hit, and how much of that is going to be going towards integrating new technology and new strategies and new ways to teach for the upcoming year? And or is it, I don't expect a hard number, but I would imagine there's a blend of what that person's going to be doing.
Yeah, I think exactly both of those. This year it was survival, right? This year, every teacher migrated his or her teaching from 100% in person to 100% digital over a weekend, right? And so teachers made that shift out of necessity. We had one technology integration specialist, which helped teachers to do that before the pandemic. Now we have two in the position. My real hope for next year is that we have moved beyond survival, and now we're beginning to look at lessons learned from this experience. And these folks are helping teachers to really critically determine what are the things we did out of necessity that actually should become part of our continuous progress, our continued practice moving forward. Teachers began presenting direct teaching lessons to a camera online because some of the students were at home. And a number of our teachers realized that recording that and archiving that allowed the students who were absent to watch it. But we also learned that a lot of the students who were there went back and watched it because hearing it a second time was helpful to them. And so even when we return to full-time in-person learning, are there strategies like that we will need to continue to borrow? I'm already talking with colleagues around the state about the opportunity of Guilford students taking classes in other high schools across the state and being able to do it for credit on their transcript because we can do that with a Zoom link now. There are huge conversations taking place, and all of these teachers are going to continue to need that kind of technology coaching support as they move through. These are certified teaching positions, but they're filled with people who are really good at technology and enjoy blending it. So I hope it goes from survival to enhancement.
And if I could just ask a question following up on what Ms. Scanlon asked earlier. I know the special education crystal ball is always cloudy at best, but the contingency that you mentioned earlier, that anticipates, that's based on prior year's experience, but there could be a huge variation from year to year, not just from families moving into Guilford throughout the school year, but the changing needs of our students, correct?
Correct. And to Mr. Gemmerman's point, we've sort of been building the contingency up a little bit over the years. If you think of the chart that I showed in the last meeting and you're seeing the budgeted and the actual spend beginning to come together, in part that's because we were being too optimistic and we were being too conservative with that contingency in the past, and we've allowed ourselves to build in more than one unanticipated outplacement in a school year. And a lot of that has been at Mr. Gammerman's urging over the last several years that we allow, and again, we don't believe that we have overbooked that contingency. You haven't seen special ed come in under budget in 8 years. So we do believe that we're beginning to hit that sweet spot. I also, to an earlier answer, I think much of the work next year, and there will be work next year, but a lot of that is going to continue to be in-house. I don't think that the COVID crisis is necessarily going to create an outplacement crisis as we come out of it and respond to it, but it is going to be continued heavy lifting for the teachers, including the special education teachers who work locally here in Guilford schools and in Guilford programs with our kids.
If I may, just to add, I really appreciate Ms. Galen and Mr. Beatty asking this question, because I will say that one of my first responses to the budget that Dr. Freeman brought the Board of Ed was, what about this tuition line? Are we being too conservative here? And one of the things that reassured me, in addition to the fact that Dr. Freeman and Mr. Scanziano gave a very reassuring answer to that question, is that, as you saw in the slide that Dr. Freeman presented within his presentation, we are finding over the last few years that our budgets and our actuals have been meeting much more succinctly than in prior years. Does that mean it will always be that way? Possibly not, but I do feel like the staff has, with this incredibly volatile line, been able to really track and predict with more precision than they had previously. And so I'm feeling some confidence in that ability and those outcomes over the last couple of years. But I really appreciate the questions, because as I just said, it was one of the first I asked. I think those of us on both boards know what we're looking at when we look at that line every year.
Anybody else who has not spoken or asked a question yet of the Board of Finance, of the Board of Education?
I can see Veronica. I don't know if you can see Mrs. Wallace, Mr. Chairman. She's waving both arms.
She's actually, no, I'm sorry, she's not on my screen. Oh, there you are. You're on page 2. Your screen 2.
I've been relegated to page 2 now.
I'm sorry. It's when you joined. That's okay. You'll move up now because you're talking. Go ahead, Veronica. I'm sorry.
Sort of along the same conversation that we've been having in the past few meetings that we've had, we talked about incoming enrollment of the kindergarten class and the thought process that many residents held their children another year because of the pandemic. Does this budget reflect, or have you had any reason to believe the incoming kindergarten class will be higher than usual? And are we prepared for that?
Yes. So there are not positions built in. We don't have, this budget is built on 12 kindergarten sections. We only opened up kindergarten enrollment a couple of weeks ago, and it is trending high right now. Again, we don't know if we're getting all of the enrollments early, or if we're going to stay on this trend. But every year there is room within the salary line to add a kindergarten section or 2 if necessary. So again, we did not build in 2 extra kindergarten sections in order to be ready for those. But in the past years where we have had to expand kindergarten sections as late as August, we have done that within the existing budget, and we do not come back and ask to add to the budget. We find a way to budget within there and do so. We're prepared this year. Every principal has space in the building should we need to add additional kindergartens. They know that they'll be monitoring closely because it could generate a late summer hire. So yes, we're ready, and we do believe the budget will accommodate. We don't think that we would have to come back and ask for more to accommodate 1 or even 2 increased kindergarten sections.
Thank you.
All right, Jonathan, you've waited long enough.
Oh,
All
Oh,
right.
wait a minute.
I have a quick one before
Sorry,
we go
Bob. I didn't
go
see
down
it.
there. No,
All
no,
right.
it's a quick
All
one.
right, good.
And it has less to do with money than it has to do with strategy. And you know, it's been a wild year, and we've been talking about a couple of positions and roles and values an awfully lot, but we haven't heard much about, and we shouldn't this year. We haven't heard much about test scores and how the kids are doing in general. How are they keeping up with reading and writing and history and all the other normal things that education, you know, we're used to hearing about. You know, what are the challenges? I'm quite optimistic we're going to get back to full time as if, you know, full days in September. I really hope we do. I think you do too. What's this going to, what adjustment? Will you feel an adjustment? How are we going to get these kids up to speed? I mean, what is it going to cost something? We don't hear enough about this, I think.
Yeah, so again, happy to speak to that. We were talking about that with the leadership team earlier today, and we're preparing a presentation for both the Board of Ed and the community before the end of the school year. So again, this has impacted all of our students, and a lot of people have asked the question by framing it in minutes. Are you counting the minutes that students have lost? And will we therefore be adding days into July or Saturdays or lengthening the school year next year to try to recoup all of those minutes that we have lost? We will be looking to offer greater summer programming opportunities this summer so that more students can keep working deeper into the summer. But what we will be doing is what's being addressed in the educational community as curriculum acceleration rather than remediation. So what we're doing carefully this year already, and we'll need to continue to do thoughtfully next year, is looking back at those state standards, identifying at each grade level the essential standards that all students need to work with, and making sure that we're addressing those core components and that we're keeping all of the students engaged and working forward. It's less important to track every little detail and make sure that we catch all the details that got dropped last year, and then next year try to do a whole year of instruction and add all of those extra details back in. Or worse, identify students who we think have slipped further behind and therefore pull them out of their mainstream instruction next year to put them in a remedial class so that they're trying to make up what they missed last year and missing more this year. The idea, again, is to then prioritize those essential standards, keep working on the learnings and the skill sets that feed those essential standards, and then next year, get everybody back in to grade level work and keeping them moving forward with the whole class. The best analogy is actually an athlete who ends up missing part of a season. The best way to get that athlete back is to know what the injury is, make sure the athlete doesn't hurt herself further, but to get her back on the field practicing with the team, and then make up all that ground together by doing the real work that's ahead of us for next year. So we're not looking at hiring in greater numbers of interventionists. We're not looking at expanding remedial services next year. We're looking again at keeping small class sizes with mainstream classroom teachers who know those children really well, know them individually, and start slowly if necessary, but build them back up to where they need to be by the end of next school year. And again, I'm giving this short shrift here tonight, but we are preparing for either a curriculum committee meeting or a workshop meeting of the Board of Education where we will present that with the supporting research and the visuals and explain why we believe that that is the best approach and why we think some of the smartest educators around the country are advocating that approach. I was really worried going into this that we were going to start making the mistakes again of the 50s and 60s and 70s and falling back to testing and measuring and remediating as a way of letting more kids fall behind rather than bringing everybody through this together.
Well, it's to use your example, this isn't just one athlete. This is not only everybody on the team, this is everybody in the league. This is everybody in every sport on the planet. So, the question goes to, this seems to be a universal cure that we're looking for. And I think you're taking advice from national, state. Yeah, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here, I take it.
Absolutely not. No, we're following the smartest people out there. We're looking at work from Joel Mehta out of Harvard. We're looking at what the Connecticut Center for School Change has been pushing out statewide. It's the approach that the State Department of Education is advocating here in Connecticut. It's what we believe is the right approach. And no, we're following the smartest people out there. We're not trying to come up with our own answer.
The most efficient way forward. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I really appreciate it.
Okay,
All right, has everyone got their seatbelt on?
let's just keep in mind that we have the town to go deliberations and discussions. So just keep that in mind.
All right, well, given the amount of public input tonight on the new position for the equity officer, as well as the comments about the book that was purchased under the professional development line, and of course the subsidy for housing. I think it's only fair to ask a few questions about the school's proposals and to talk about the issue a little bit. And I think I want to say something just immediately up front, and that is that prejudice and racism is disgusting. I don't think it's on its way to being dead. I don't think any of our residents or our countrymen think that racism and racial hatred is anything but an abhorrent. And I also want to go on to say, and maybe this is just naive understanding, but I have an expectation that our school system, our local government, our state government, and our federal government will never treat someone in an inequitable way because of their skin color, their sex, whatever, anything, as individuals. And I actually think that we all have that in common. But I think that different sides of this debate that are talking about some of these proposals have some questions that are worthy of answers. For instance, I'm still learning about this particular book, and I didn't realize that something like a lower rate for capital gains might be seen as racist. And I have to say, I don't know if I agree with that, Dr. Freeman. I really don't. I would be disgusted by something that I did feel was racist or some kind of mistreatment that I felt was unequal, but I don't know if I could agree with that particular idea that may or may not have been expressed by the author. I'm still learning about this topic. But I have some questions about your proposal. So one of them is that we've got, one item where it appears to be what I would take as a housing subsidy. And I think of my time on the board, and I think of numerous discussions with the Board of Education and you yourself, the superintendent, and even teachers and other people in the community. And I think for a long time, this has been a problem that most teachers really have a difficult time affording housing in Guilford, Connecticut. But I think most residents might have a difficult time affording housing in Guilford, Connecticut.
Mr. Trout, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to correct a misinterpretation. This is a residency in the medical sense. We are not offering anybody a housing subsidy in this budget. The residency that we are suggesting is a teacher tuition residency. We will be partnering with 25 other school districts around the state, 3 of the regional educational resource centers. The term residency applies to somebody who will be working full-time in our school during the day and attending school full-time at night to achieve a teacher certification. It is irrelevant to us where the person lives. I'm sorry if that was not.
It's an educational subsidy.
Yes.
To help with educational costs.
The cost to us is to offset tuition, coaching, mentorship, supports. Yep, no, it's something we're doing collaboratively. It is an educational endeavor. I apologize for the misinterpretation. It's an educational residency. It has nothing to do with living expenses. It is irrelevant. It's moot where this individual lives.
Okay, I think the question still may resound though. So I look at this, why wouldn't this be based on need? why would it be based on color of someone's skin?
Dr. Balstraci, do you want to start on this one? And then
I would love to start. You know, one of the things that we know in the state of Connecticut is that while we have a significant portion of students who are students of color, we have a much lower proportion of teachers who are teachers or people of color. And so this is a statewide initiative to try to change that. We in Guilford have very, very few teachers of color. And in fact, teachers of color may hesitate to want to come and teach in Guilford because of that. This is not, if you are a person of color, you may wish to go to a district that may have more supports in place for staff of color, et cetera. For us, the participation in this program is extremely exciting because it supports the possibility that we could expand the diversity of our teaching staff, which can only then help build upon itself. And this is a positive for any student in this district, regardless of race or color. So this is an opportunity to enhance the diversity of our school community in a really positive way, and in a way which the Guilford Public Schools Administration has been trying to do for some time, but is difficult, again, because a largely white community may not feel welcoming, and this step may communicate to people of color that, in fact, we would invite their presence and their participation in our community.
Okay,
I have nothing to add.
I had another question about the equity officer. And, you know, in my opinion, if there's any kind of inequity, the school should absolutely address it and try and correct it. But I do question, again, in the midst of this economic situation, why can't we do that with our current staff? You know, if they weren't doing that already, I would find that to be irresponsible. And
I'm happy to respond to that one. So
why
Jonathan,
can't we do it with current staff?
We make every effort to do it with current staff. But as you heard earlier during some of the public comment, we know that now workplaces and universities, and as I've talked with parents in the community about this over the last couple of years, the military branches offer officers who do this sort of work. We, you know, the other night we were asked if we can tell you how many concerns or complaints around this have been brought forward. We can't. And the reason we can't is that those concerns or complaints are aired in a number of various places. Sometimes it might come through as a discipline referral. Sometimes it might come through as one student raising a concern about bullying. Oftentimes they are simply in-person conversations or phone calls or emails between a parent and a teacher or a school counselor or an administrator or the superintendent. And oftentimes we believe that it's going unsaid. So to create a position that is invitational, to create a position that says we want to know how we're doing in this area, and if we can do better, to please let us know. Mr. Shada, after Tuesday night's meeting, $25,000 is 0.04% of this budget proposal sitting in front of this board tonight. We have 1% of our population of students who identify as Black or African American. We have another 6% who identify as Latinx, and we have another 7% who identify as Asian. So to invest 0.04% of this budget, around 14% of our student population, seems to me to be a good way to communicate to them that they are welcomed and supported and that we want to hear their questions and concerns. But I'll go beyond that. The way that I have described this position every single time says that if a young lady, if a female student in one of her classes feels that she is being mistreated or she is not being treated fairly because of her gender, then this person is there to support that student and hear her concerns raised as well. That's 50% of our population. We want our students to know that however they identify, can at times place them at risk of not being seen, at risk of being bullied, at risk of not being heard. And it doesn't matter if that identity has to do with your gender or your gender identity or your religion or your race or your ethnicity. But when 90% of the teaching force is white and middle-aged and gray-haired like me, that's not always welcoming or invitational for every student or every parent who wants to bring those concerns forward and talk about them. And to me, this seems like a significant return on a relatively minor investment. Again, there's a number of communities around the state who are hiring full administrative level equity officers. Every time I hear somebody call this an equity officer, I cringe, because we didn't take that step this year. If we were not in the financial crisis that we were in, I might have been here tonight talking about a full administrative position with contractual protections and medical benefits at $150,000 salary. Instead, we're talking about 10 hours a week with a contracted position for $25,000. We absolutely feel that it is the right thing to do. And if universities and the military and Fortune 500 companies are doing it, our students deserve the same level of support.
Okay, last question. Sorry, I thought these questions were relevant to tonight's discussion.
Oh, they are. I appreciate the questions. I appreciate the opportunity to answer them, Mr. Chada.
So we've got a book that's out there, frankly, that a lot of our residents have said should not really be paid for with taxpayer dollars. And on the surface, this book has a title, How Not to Be Anti-Racist. And I think probably 100% of the people, I hope, in this country would say, of course not, but the devil's in the details. Inside the book, would you agree or completely disagree that there are some political opinions expressed by the author, for instance, that maybe capitalism is racist, and that perhaps residents don't agree with that particular line of thought, and they don't think tax dollars should be used or teachers should be required to read such a book?
So that book was purchased for the professional staff, for the teaching staff in our schools. It was purchased at a time while we were going through discussions about our mascot in this community. It was purchased at a time that George Floyd had just been killed, and that students in Guilford, as well as around the country, were marching and standing on this green protesting. We felt that it was important for our teachers to understand the conversation that is taking place around topics like that. It's important for our teachers to understand what students are concerned about and what is happening in the society and in the environment around all of us. That book was purchased for teachers. Every teacher was given it. I think that when the superintendent purchases it and gives it to a teacher, I think there's an expectation that they read it, but they were never required to read it. They weren't giving work time to read it. We didn't quiz them on it, and we didn't withhold their check if they couldn't pass the quiz. We felt that it was important for our teachers to be ready to engage in the conversation, because particularly at the middle and high school level, kids come in expecting us to be able to engage in that conversation. I don't think that we should apologize for asking our teachers to engage in provocative conversation at a professional level. That book was not purchased for students, and I know that there are a number of lighthouse school districts around the state that are using that book or another book by the same author as a required text in high school classes. We're not doing that in Guilford right now. That's not happening here in Guilford. But I'm sorry, I can't apologize for asking our teachers to be current on a topic that their kids cared about deeply at the end of last year, and it's continuing to shape dialogue in this country right now. I don't want a student to walk into a classroom and ask a teacher questions related to that book or the dialogue around that book and have to say, I can't talk to you about that. I haven't read the book. Right? It's just too important. And Jonathan, we've bought books for teachers. We've bought children's books for teachers. We've bought all kinds of texts for teachers that help them to be ready to be supportive and effective in their classrooms.
Do you think it might be a wiser policy, though, for the school system to sort of stay away from some kind of book or curriculum that might be considered, perceived, or perhaps may even be determined to be politically political instruction, for instance. Do you think maybe it would be just a better policy to say, I think we should stick to core education, chemistry, math, English, and let topics that are political or perhaps have opinion be something that students discover later in life as they build up their value system from a traditional education and their parents?
Then Jonathan, climate change, evolution, the Civil War, slavery, and Japanese imprisonment, Japanese American imprisonment during World War II. There are components of core instruction that are going to be provocative. If we didn't delve into anything that was, we have a unit in the 4th grade where we ask kids to think about child slavery and child labor. It is our job to help our kids learn how to address challenging and provocative content in a way that is respectful and through a critical lens. We present those topics and we present them in a way that is balanced. And then we ask the students to wrestle with that. No, we cannot divorce ourselves. We would not be able to.
Is there a balance between maybe like something that might be considered a more conservative idea? Was there another book that you purchased that perhaps had a more of a traditionally conservative slant to it?
This past June, no, but I'm happy to go back and find a list of all the books that I've purchased for teachers since I've been here, most of which actually have been children's books, and I believe would be recognized as having non-confrontational opinions. I think we strike a balance, Mr. Trotta, because the book that we are talking about is not in any single student curricula in this school system. It's not in our libraries, in our schools. It was a book purchased for adults who support our children during a particularly tumultuous time, and I felt that they needed to be ready to have that conversation. It's a book that is discussed broadly in educational circles, and Guilford teachers need to be able to move within those circles.
And if I may
I would just recommend to the residents that it's a reasonable for people to ask questions on both sides about this. And, I appreciate having a dialogue with Dr. Freeman. And I think that there's a lot of room for discussion amongst our residents and in our board meetings for these topics.
I'm sorry, all I wanted to add is, and I've said this to a couple of people in response to this question, our staff are thoughtful, careful, competent, skilled individuals who read all sorts of texts, who look for evidence, and then who prepare their students to do exactly the same, which means they're reading material from all different kinds of perspectives and are teaching students how to critically think about the material they look at, understand where the evidence, if there is or if there is not evidence, comes from, and then make their own well-informed decisions. And if we heard anything from recently graduated students in June, we heard that we did not do enough of that work around issues like race and social justice. And so this is partially a response to make sure that we provide educational opportunities for our students to think critically about issues and make sure that our very competent staff have material to do so.
Can you at least recognize, though, Dr. Balistrisi,
Jonathan, I am the chair. Jonathan
may not find the critical thinking to be something that they agree with.
Jonathan, I'm going to end the conversation right now for a second. Okay.
That's okay, Mr. Chairman.
I am doing that because we have a lot to go on.
Indeed.
There have been questions and there have been answers. And listen, I appreciate the discussion. I'm sitting here listening to it, and I think we're all on this call and we're thinking, listen, it's a conversation that needs to be had. But my suggestion is, as I said the other night, we do not get to select the line items and what the Board of Education, how they spend their money. That is up to them. If you don't agree with it, go to a Board of Education meeting, okay? Talk about the pedagogy, talk about the philosophy. That's fine. That's the forum to do it. Right now, we're debating on fair and reasonable budgets to pass to the voters. and to have this discussion and have this debate is not the right location to have a debate about what is right and what is wrong in the school system. That is up to the Board of Education.
I think the proposals are related to expenditures and that this is the proper forum to discuss.
All right, so
them.
we have totaled $31,000 of expenditure. We're talking about a $25,000 for equity, and we're talking about $6,000 book. Is there anything else that we need to know about that's affecting the budget?
I think that elimination of the mascot would probably be characterized in this particular subject matter.
Oh, now we're going to go into that.
Another
So, again,
$60,000.
I could just add
All right.
something.
Jeffrey, go ahead.
I mean, that's 20% of the income.
Could I speak, Jonathan?
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
Great. I think that you've had an opportunity to ask your questions. They've been answered. You may not agree with the answers, or you may have further questions. The forum for that is, as the chairman just pointed out, is to take it up at a Board of Education meeting. We're here to debate and discuss the budget. The mascot issue has been resolved, and there are expenses associated with the change. Whether anyone agreed with the change of the name or they didn't, that issue is concluded. It's time for us at this meeting to move on to other subjects, in my opinion.
Is there anything else for the Board of Education?
I have many more.
I'll give you one more as long as it's not about something you've already talked about.
All right, let me dig one up here. All right, this one is probably a little easier, and it's probably actually been discussed before, and I apologize, but I was curious if you laid out why we had such a big increase in the special education transportation. And I can't remember, it probably got covered, and maybe it's more students or just a general increase in the special education line. I think it went up by $147,000 or so.
It's going to be a combination of what you identified, Jonathan. It's going to be a combination of the students who are going out. It's going to have to do with maybe losing shared routes with other students who may have been in the same outplacements that we don't have access to. There's contractual costs increase that are associated with it. It could be that students change their placements and are now in more expensive ones for transportation. Mrs. Trudeau, I don't know if you would want to add to that answer. I do remember we answered it before. And
If I can, yes, I would. If you look back, this is a line that has been over budget over the previous years. We have increased the tuition line to allow to cover the additional outplacements, but we have not been increasing the transportation line, and they should have been increased at the same time.
Thank you, Mrs. Trudeau.
Okay, some of my remaining questions, Mike, are on capital.
All right. I had a couple on capital too, but it's not that much. So I do want to move on. We're on the schools right now, and because we do have elected officials that are on this meeting or in this meeting, I will allow them to speak because they are elected officials. I will do the same thing with the town. I do see board member Dick Hirschon. Dick, if you'd like to speak, if you could, please make it quick or as quick as possible, if you'd like to, so we can move on to the town. Thank you.
I'm fine, thank you.
Thank you. I saw your hand up, so I will lower your hand. Thank you. Okay. We are now going to move, by the way, as we always do, thank you, Dr. Balistraci, thank you, Dr. Freeman, for being available, and the rest of the board. I know a lot of the board members are on right now. Thank you for being part of this. I'd like to continue right now with the questions that we would have for the Board of Selectmen, and for Selectman Hoey, who will be representing, I guess, any questions that are asked of the Board of Finance regarding the budget and the capital bonding request. On this one, if I could start pretty much with a simple one. Social services, I just want to make sure I saw the number correctly, just to reiterate. Mid-year, there were 3,468, I guess you could say, appointments, calls. I'm sorry, I'm not going to scroll through, but visits. But all of 1920, there were 2,696. Are we really trending towards almost 7,000?
Mike, am I off mute? Yeah.
Yes, you are.
That's what it's starting to look like, Mike.
I just want to make sure I saw that right, that the mid-year number was almost 3,500 and the full year number for 1920 was almost 27.
Yep.
All right. I'll ask
And
one
Mike,
more.
that's directly related to COVID and the need for the programs that are administered or accessed through our social service agency, and those are largely state and federal programs.
I'm not necessarily questioning why. I'm basically reiterating a need of the town.
Great.
The other item I have is on the union contracts that are up. I know at some point, Mitch, you, others have mentioned which union contracts are up that make up the reserve for personnel of about $200,000. Could you just remind us which union contracts are up?
Sure, Mitch Goldblatt. Yep, Mitch Goldblatt, Director of Human Resources. Mike, we've got the firefighters union, we have the dispatchers union, the Guilford Supervisors Association, as well as our largest union, the Guilford Employees Association. There are also a couple of personnel contracts that are also up for renegotiation at this time. That comprises that number.
Excellent, thank you.
Welcome.
Other questions for our first selectman?
I have a follow-up to one of your questions, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Sure.
So I know, Mary Jane, you had mentioned that we got an extension on the SAFER grant. How, after this one-year extension, how will the union contract negotiations impact the overall cost that we have to absorb? Do we have a sense of that, or will that be something we figure out this year?
Well, obviously, all of the positions included in the SAFER are already covered under that contract, and their salaries are already adjusted for that. So the only impact will be that we will not receive reimbursement in the 22-23 year.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Anybody else?
I do my.
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Veronica, go ahead. I heard you chime in first. Go ahead.
This question's for either the first selectman or Mitch. But we were in the insurance line item, there's a cybersecurity and active shooter insurance. So my question is this optional? I mean, are we required to have it? Is this like another unfunded state mandate? Is this part of bundled with our insurance liability, or, because this is new, we haven't had to do this before.
Veronica, there is no mandate. It's not a state mandate to do it, but it is becoming common practice in school districts across the country to engage, or municipalities to take out insurance policies against active shooting incidents. This is an emerging trend. We would be purchasing a policy through one of our consultants, but it is not a requirement. Nor is cybersecurity. But as I look around the screen, Charlie Haverda, probably once every third or fourth Board of Selectmen meeting, is quick to ask, are we sure that we are securing our networks? Because the number of the incidents of ransomware throughout the country are not limited to private industry. The public side, the public sector has becoming an increasingly easier target, largely because municipalities have not invested in the levels of cybersecurity that the private sector has done. So they've become easier targets. I think a couple of years ago, the easier targets were hospitals, and now municipalities are targets. So this is virtually insurance to buy our way out of ransomware attacks.
Thank you.
Other questions? Jonathan, did you have some?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I've
Go
got
ahead.
a few.
Good.
All right, Mr. First Selectman, I do need to ask you sort of a similar line of questioning about new hiring. As I stated, and I think a lot of residents feel this way, and they've communicated to me, we are in some pretty dire economic circumstances. And though you've got compelling requests from departments to do some additional hiring, I still feel like it's an inappropriate time and that we shouldn't be hiring any extra staff members for the town or the Board of Education, given that we're in very dire economic circumstances. One article I read said it's 3 times as bad as the banking debacle, and perhaps maybe about half as bad as the magnitude of the Great Depression. I think an economist, I think Rubini, and I apologize, just kind of remembering some articles I read, he is wondering if we'll come out of this. It may take a decade, he was predicting. And I just feel like under less dire circumstances, we have asked for concessions and we have held back on hiring.
Jonathan, thank you for the question. I want to first comment on your supposition and your statements about the dire economic circumstances we find ourselves in. Guilford, in large measure, has the ability to survive in a greater capacity than a lot of other portions of this country based on the socioeconomic profile that we have. And just as some empirical evidence, Jonathan, our tax collection rate, despite the fact that we have twice extended the collection date per the governor's executive order capacity. At the end of February, we had collected 97.58% of our taxes, as opposed to at the end of February 2020, we had collected 98.29. So we're looking at about a 0.7 difference. That does not suggest to me that we have a significant issue here in Guilford with people's capacity and ability to pay the taxes. I will concede there are individuals in this community who are struggling and will continue to struggle through the pandemic. But what I want to be careful of is that we don't hang the hat on the fact that the economy is falling through the floor, and that there are desperate times here in Guilford. You're right, there are desperate times here in Guilford, and we've demonstrated, I think, to you that those new positions are in some measure directly related to serving and solving the problems that many in our community are facing as a result of COVID. That's particularly true of the positions in social services and with youth and family services. Additionally, that applies to the contracted positions and the part-time positions looking for in the health department. Just today, I authorized, at the request of Dr. Freeman, to hire a part-time contact tracer just to handle the workload that's associated with the schools, because we are being forced to make decisions about quarantining prior to being able to complete contact tracing for anyone who may have potentially been exposed in a classroom or a series of classrooms. So that's my answer to you. There are needs, Jonathan, whether you like it or not, and those needs go to servicing the community that expects their government, their education system, to get them through these kind of events and these kind of serious challenges that we're all facing. So that's my answer to you, Jonathan. I think we have demonstrated the need for these positions. And if you don't agree with the need, that's fine. But it was a unanimous recommendation of the Board of Selectmen to hire the positions that you have seen laid out before you. If you want to quibble, you want to argue about one, or you want to hypothesize about the fact that What would we do if we didn't have them? I'll give you the answer. People in this community won't get served.
You know, I don't think it's fair to say I'm hypothesizing what we would do without positions that we're adding. I mean, obviously, we just made it through a budget cycle without these positions. And then to say that people's paying their taxes is a measure of their financial strength. Taxes are not discretionary. You know, you don't pay your taxes, you eventually are probably going to lose your property, your home. So, you know, I don't know if that's a fair measure of the health of our residents. And while you make some good points about some of these requests for staff are related to our circumstances, it's still difficult that we've got a double-edged sword. You know, you want to help one side of the community, but you're going to ask to take more out of the pocket of the other side of the community. So I still feel like under these economic circumstances, in contrast to the private sector, that I find it like almost astonishing that the public sector just continues to have raises, continues to have protections for jobs, and, you know, continues to hire. I find it quite a contrast.
Thank you for your opinion.
All right, so I take it that the Board of Selectmen would not consider cutting some of the new hires out of the proposal for the budget.
They wouldn't have put them forward to you if they didn't think they were essential.
All right,
It depends on what we do.
so I've definitely got a few more, but I can wait for the questions to go around.
Anyone else on the town side?
I have a,
Veronica, go ahead.
I just have an IT question, I guess. I'm really hopeful that we'll all be able to see each other again next year, you know, in the big room, you know, and my question is, part of the beauty of this is that we've been able to have people who wouldn't normally come to one of our meetings in person, but they have the ability to do this through Zoom or other electronic means. Is there anything in our budget that in the future, like, you know, when we resume in-person meetings, that people will still have the ability to participate electronically? Maybe we can get better or increased participation.
Great question.
Veronica, thank you for that question. The answer is there's nothing specific in this budget for an IT spend to enhance our Zoom, our capability to do remote meetings. However, as you may recall, this board had allocated some money to an IT technology fund. We used some surplus money to bank some money for IT projects. And we actually have a proposal from a vendor to set up systems, large-scale systems capable of conducting Zoom meetings while conducting an in-person meeting at the community center. We have outfitted through COVID relief money the Selectmen's conference room with a large screen video capacity that also ties into our network, so that we could effectively live stream a meeting, a Board of Selectmen meeting out of that office, and allow people to participate remotely. So yes, we've made some improvements, but there's nothing in this budget specifically towards the next layer. But again, there is money in the IT reserve fund that hopefully would cover the expense of putting in a system at the community center.
Thank you. Jeff, go ahead.
Matt, do you have any estimate as to what the impact on the town would be in terms of capacity to perform its IT services, or the cost to get somebody in if something were to happen to Tony? I see one of the line items is the assistant for our IT specialist. And I just think it'd be helpful for people to understand what would happen if, God forbid, he didn't show up for work one day and was out for a while.
That is the challenge we've looked at for a couple of years, and quite honestly, I turned a blind eye to it over a couple of years because there's been a request from Mary Jane and from Tony for additional personnel for a while. We had hoped that by bringing in a full-time individual for police and fire, that there would be additional bandwidth available to support Tony. That would be the short-term fix, is that individual would have to try to fill in. Quite honestly, he wouldn't be able to do both jobs. So we would, if Tony were if Tony were to quit, let's use that scenario. We would need to hire a contractor to come in and learn the network, and secondly, manage it. So with having Tony have a backup, it's not just as a backup for Tony should he walk out. It's the increased workload as we have seen the technology requirements increase in terms of operating the business. We have, for many years, we neglected investments in IT, but we talked a little while ago about the cybersecurity. Security is taking up significantly more time on IT professionals throughout the industry, and that didn't exist years ago. Which is why there were so many vulnerabilities in municipalities. We are now issuing folks multiple devices. We have handheld devices for our inspectors out in the field. We are deploying laptops so that we can do remote work. And as we continue to invest in technology with implementing new modules and new software systems, self-service, permitting self-service, a municipal purchasing software. You'd be surprised at how arcane some of our processes are and how paper intensive they are. But just having a resource available to work through those projects, let alone the fact that there are, Mitch, what's the numbers? Between full and part-time employees in town, there's 190, maybe more than that.
But almost 200 full-time people right now, plus about 50 to 60 people who are permanent or regular part-time, and he's stretched.
Right. So out of that, you got to back out the 90 some odd that are in police and fire, and the public works guys. Most of those guys don't have don't have computers or electronic devices. Although we are starting to deploy iPads for those folks for task completion, task assignments as well. So if you're looking at probably 100 full-time employees, that support ratio doesn't exist in the private sector. One IT support individual supporting over 100 employees. Those numbers don't exist, and I can tell you that because I used to work in that industry.
Great, thank you.
Matt, I want to go back to the question that Jonathan had about the positions.
Yeah.
Understanding the need, are these, do you and the Board of Selectmen see these as short-term needs that are needed this year and then may go away in the future? Do you see them as long-term? I mean, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to that, but I want to hear it from you. What we're going to see in future budgets, that once these positions are in, are they at some point going to come out, or are they going to remain in the future budgets?
Right. At this point, they're going to remain in. It's not; these aren't all related to COVID expenditures. For instance, in social services, we have an individual who is classified as an administrative assistant that is doing program work, program coordination work, in addition to the admin duties. And we're still not getting through the cases. People are working overtime. People are working beyond their hours, beyond their scope. So that is a combination there. We've had that need identified. I think you've heard Tammy ask for more resources over the years, and we have not been able to give them to her. So this is an accumulation plus COVID putting it over the top. At Youth and Family Services, Mike, I suspect that one's going to be in there for the long term, because we have had a resource at Adams Middle School doing school-based clinical work, but it was largely funded by grant money. That grant money has dried up, and now with the increase in the number of cases that are presenting at Adams Middle School, yes, those are COVID related, but this position existed prior to that. At the health department, that's the exact example about we are evaluating whether or not this is permanent, this would be permanent or not. That's why we have in this budget, because of the dramatic impact that COVID has on our health director's ability to do her normal 9 to 5 jobs beyond the COVID contact tracing and the advising of the school district and numerous other things. We don't know what the long-term impact is going to be, which is why, as a board, we decided to do contracted labor and part-time employees to evaluate this once we came out of the COVID-19. On the public works side, I think you guys have heard this for years. The commission has been asking for resources for the last 5 to 7 years, and they feel that this will get them back to the complement that they had years ago when the department was staffed most effectively. What did I miss? Which one did I miss?
I was going to say it should be noted at Public Works that they also sacrificed some of their budget to get that position in.
Exactly.
I think wasn't building department also?
A building department is also the same thing as with health. Although I am convinced that based on the changes in the statutes relative to the number of inspections required per permit and the uptick in our grand list, which is directly is a direct result of increased economic activity in our community. And there are, I think you heard that the budget presentations, there are 3 or 4 potentially large-scale residential opportunities that are already being talked about at over with the planning and zoning folks. So the need is there, but that's another one that we wanted to wait and see. And it's not entirely wait and see. That there is a significant shortage in terms of hiring full-time building officials.
And I could speak to that based on my profession.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Others? Sorry, if you're wait, I've got 3 screens up here. So if you're anybody else on the Board of Finance questions for Matt?
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
Jonathan. I thought you were going to chime in. Go ahead, Jonathan. Go ahead.
All right, so I think I want to go back to medical again, and I want to discuss what I think is a very important issue for the taxpayers, probably the biggest financial issue for the taxpayers that I see, and that is this 3-year trend, at least, of running these budget surpluses that in some cases are bigger than the tax increase themselves. And a lot of these budget surpluses are been driven by overfunding our medical expenses. And I obviously want to have a real discussion about it because they are difficult expenses to budget for. They're volatile. And we obviously want to have a solid medical program that covers all our employees. I don't disagree with that. But when we see a 3-year pattern where we're exceeding the medical expenses by $1.2 million, $3.3 million one year, and perhaps this year we're up to $1.3 million surplus, which could change. We've got a couple more months to go, but we're definitely running a surplus at the moment. And we've got a fund that's up to maybe 7 million or so, and I believe probably the only piece of guidance I've seen was a note, I think, on one of the finance director's memos that just said, we should just at least have a minimum of 2 months. I don't think she was trying to prescribe any perfect number, but said that at least a minimum of 2 months. I think 2 months would be around, $2.2, $2.3 million. I think we've got $7 million of taxpayer money in there. And I just, throughout my term on the Board of Finance, I don't like it when we tax and the money just kind of sits in these funds when we didn't really need it, in my opinion. So I'm wondering if the town and the Board of Education might have a serious discussion about adjusting it in maybe a conservative way, but trying to spare the taxpayers a little bit this budget cycle to see if we can get a little closer to our appropriation meeting our actual costs.
Jonathan, thank you for the question. I want to just have Mary Jane verify that we ever had a 2.3 or a $3.3 million surplus in any one year in the health account, because I don't recall the numbers being that large, but that's really not the important part. Jonathan, yes, we've been very fortunate over the last few years to be able to build the cushion that we have in that healthcare account. When you want to do trend lines, you sometimes might want to look beyond 3 years, because I believe it was 7 or 8 years ago, that account was in a deficit position of over $750,000 because we had done some of what you had just suggested, which we had not budgeted appropriately. The numbers that you see in front of you today are the result of a collaboration between the Board of Education and the town and our insurance consultant. And we actually did what you said. We took the insurance consultant's recommendation and we lowered our expenditure to a degree that could potentially put us at risk of having to dip into that fund balance. And that's why we did it, because that fund balance is healthy enough that we could take a risk this year. So Jonathan, your idea is great. I want to thank Mary Jane and Linda Trudeau for having had the same thought 3 months ago and implemented that. So it has been done. And again, I want, trend lines are interesting. 3 years, wonderful news. We don't know what's going to happen next week or next year or 2 years out, but we do know what happened 7 or 8 years ago when we made the mistake of not budgeting appropriately. And we were in a deficit position, and both the board and the Board of Education and the town had to appropriate money out of their budgets to cover the shortfall.
So you're making excellent points, but I'm looking at the magnitude of the surplus. And I mean, we're talking about an extremely large magnitude. We're talking about a surplus that would literally make the tax increase unnecessary for the town for that year.
Right. And Jonathan, I think you know that we have already asked that the Board of Finance consider appropriating some of that surplus funds to some long-term obligations the town has and long-term liabilities the town has relative to other post-employment benefits, from which which are currently being paid out of the very same account that we're talking about.
And this is another issue that I wanted to bring to the forefront as well. One year we took I think $1 million out of this surplus to finance OPEP trust fund that we are getting off the ground. And I think I want taxpayers to know that I agree that creating the fund is an excellent long-term solution to the OPEP costs. But I am expressing concern that it's difficult to burden the taxpayers with this very perhaps rapid and quick buildup of such a fund. And I think that we actually need to temper that and be careful that, the taxpayer is paying almost $900 or so thousand dollars of OPEB benefits that we actually incur. And then, at the same time asked to contribute $1 million towards a fund. And I think that we need to think this through, be more upfront about it. I've told you I don't agree that we should take the money out of the surplus. We should put it in the budget up front, let taxpayers know that we want to build this fund, and that we should build it incrementally with a little bit less burden per year to get there. And then I think another problem, and this is probably because the issue is so new, is that we need to get that money to work for the taxpayer so that it is earning some type of return. And forgive me, I don't know if we're there yet, but I thought at this moment we hadn't quite figured out how to get it invested and working in that particular capacity where it's earning some interest. So I've got concerns about OPEB too. I feel like we should be including it as a budget item. You might say, hey, it's already mixed into medical. That may be an argument, but I wouldn't mind if we had a separate line item that, this money being put aside for an OPEB trust fund, just like we would have some amount for our contribution to retirement.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm really concerned about this medical issue because I look at dollar amounts for what's happening in our budget. And yeah, I've got some
opinions and concerns about where I think we shouldn't be spending money and we should. But on this particular issue, I think it's very bipartisan. And, you know, we need to look at this like, are we overfunding medical? You know, the taxpayer could use a break.
Is that a question or a statement?
Good night.
It's a little of both. I'm asking you if maybe you would.
I already answered the question, Jonathan.
All right, let me rephrase because it was phrased as a comment. Let me be a little more specific. Would the Board of Selectmen consider an OPEB budget line in its request and just ask the taxpayer up front to contribute money to this trust fund so that,
Are you saying
that they
are you
realize
saying take
that we're building a fund to finance these expenses instead of, I think, traditionally taking them out as they're occurred?
That would be sort of like a shell game, because we would be saying we're putting a line item in the budget and then we would be appropriating funds from the medical account to fund that contribution for that year. So the taxpayers wouldn't see an effect in that way either. If you're also suggesting that you wanted to break out the $900,000 OPEB expense that we're currently paying out of the medical expense fund, you as the Board of Finance have the right to dictate how information is presented to you in terms of reports. So you could probably fix that.
I just don't want to overcharge residents for our medical expenses. I think we're seeing a pattern where we've done that. I don't think it was intentional, but we're seeing a pattern and the numbers are so material that I feel like we need to make an adjustment. So I would ask, again, I think I asked, but you would not consider a greater adjustment than the $113,000 decrease that's in the budget now?
No,
Would you consider some flexibility?
I'm not going to speak for I'm not going to speak for the rest of the board, but I doubt it. I would not be in favor of that. And then I would ask you a question, Jonathan. What do you think the number should be? How far off of the consultant's recommendation do you think we should go and feel safe? And how much are you willing to bet on it that you have the right number?
So I'm seeing about a 7-month surplus in the fund. And over the last 3 years, I think I've seen a 1.2 million surplus, a 3.3 million surplus, and a 1.3 million surplus. So between the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen, I would think a $500,000 decrease between the two of you would be reasonable for this next budget cycle. And we would see if we still run a surplus of perhaps $1 million. You know, that's a fairly conservative. Right now, I think the decreases total about 180,000, somewhere along those lines, between the school and the town.
I think there's a point that bears some clarification, and Matt's been there, but you know, everybody here who's a professional actuary, raise your hand. So if we want to outguess the actuaries who are setting this up, and Matt pointed to, let's say, a 5-year trend line, then that's what happens. And sometimes it's gonna look like we're paying too much in for a while, and sometimes it can look like we're paying too little in. But
Rob, is this an actuarial?
Yes, it is.
Oh,
Yes.
well, one at a time, guys.
Yeah. It's actuaries that puts it's insurance consultants who look at the demographics, the anticipated needs, and we happen to be at the moment blessed with a very healthy herd of teachers. So you know, it's we can't tell, but the money, you know, we don't take the extra money and rip it up and throw it in the sound. You know, unless you're planning to leave town, Jonathan, you know, the money is there for you next year. Are you planning to leave town?
Rob, I know a lot of taxpayers who'd rather have the money in their pocket.
But if I'm understanding things correctly,
we'll just ask them back for it next April, Jonathan. It's all the same.
you've already conceded that funding the OPEB account, you've had the floor a lot, so give me a moment here. You've already conceded that funding the OPEB account is a necessary thing, that over time that benefits the taxpayers, and you're in favor of doing that. And basically what I understand your principal point is that you'd rather simply move that into a separate line item and thereby diminish the amount of money that's in the medical account against the year where perhaps we have 4 or 5 more significant medical cases that would drive that number potentially into deficit. So it's not a function of saving dollars. It's a function of how you're actually reporting them.
So I think you're misunderstanding, some of the numbers and the magnitude of the surpluses we see. And then I think my real point is that I don't think it's fair for us, the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance, to decide that we're going to take $1 million surplus out of our medical expenses and allocate it towards OPEB. Although it is within our chartered rights, I won't disagree with that. But I feel that the proper way to address this with the town is to let them know in a budget that we want to finance this account, which does make sense in a long-term and financial perspective, and just be upfront about it and say, we want to finance this. We're going to ask the taxpayers to do it. And we want them to go to referendum and confirm that they agree that we're making a wise decision. And then the amount that the OPEB fund should increase is a very interesting point. I mean, to ask taxpayers, admittedly, we've only taken $1 million once, but to ask the taxpayers to take $1 million each year to build up this fund is a substantial burden on taxpayers. I don't know of a perfect number. We want to build the fund. I think a comment was made in our last meeting that it would be difficult to just immediately build up a fund. Maybe it would cost $15, $16 million to at our assumption rate to have a fund that can be fully financed for these expenses. But there's some number that maybe is appropriate where taxpayers are like, yeah, we're on the way to something that's more secure. And then as those funds are invested properly and they're earning a return, they can begin to offset the actual expenses.
So you're obviously making the point we're trying to make, which is the OPEB trust fund needs to be funded, and it's a matter of how we get the funding it. And your fundamental position is that it should be more as a separate line item, but not that the amount of money that eventually needs to get in there, which we've seen is $36 million.
If I could step in here for a second, I think to go
That's a little misconstrued though.
To go to what Bob was saying, okay, raising hands, how many are actuarials? How many people who are going to vote know what OPEB is? Okay, we're leaders of this town. We're elected officials. We're supposed to be elected to make the right decision. Yeah, it's within our charter to do it. But if you ask the voters to vote on how to allocate monies and OPEB and start explaining this, you're going to have voters that don't know what they're voting on. There's a reason why we're elected. There's a reason why we are chosen to be leaders of this town, because we're supposed to do things responsibly. My goodness, I think we've been doing that. So listen, I'm just saying, you want to put voters in charge of how we're going to allocate monies. Listen, we could educate them all we want. We could get everybody out to vote for it, but we even have difficulty understanding it, and we're on the Board of Finance. So I stand my ground and say, we want to allocate it and show it, fine, but to have the decision be made by voters on line items that are really something that we should have the purview and the responsibility for to understand and do right. That's my point.
So, in all fairness, man, I want the voters to confirm our budget and to vote on it. And admittedly, it is pretty complicated and it's hard to make an educated vote. But I think the taxpayers and the residents, they do a good job sometimes. I think back to the school. A few times we presented a proposal where they said, hey, that's just too much. And then, we came down to a number, we got an excellent school, and, we met the public somewhere and they said, okay, we find that to be reasonable. Let's make an investment in the town. And I think the taxpayer does have a great deal of difficulty with the budgets, but sometimes they'll just say, hey, it's too high. Why don't you think of something to bring it down? And here we are with a medical cost that I think is being overfunded. So the voters might say, listen, why don't you give us a break to the tune of $500,000? And if you're right, and you still run $1 million surplus, the town is really no worse for it. You're already holding 7 months of surplus when you probably maybe only need 3 or 4.
I think, Jonathan, you're talking to people who are not qualified to make the decision, the actuarial decision. So maybe you should sit down with the actuaries and have them let them know.
So are our actuarials involved in this, or only the actuarials of the insurance companies? Because this is a yearly budgeted item. This isn't a fund that has an assumption rate.
No, we don't make up the number, no.
I'm just confused. Do we do an actuarial study for this, or do we just ask the medical insurance companies to give us guidance?
Well, that's where they come. Those are the people within the medical insurance companies that make the call.
We also have, Mitch, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, first of all, Mary Jane just texted me. She's lost her internet. She apologizes. So I'll try to pinch hit here a bit. We do receive information from our consultant actuaries about what is required for the OPEB fund. But remember, as Mary Jane said the other night, we're not budgeting for OPEB this year. Okay, so I think we maybe and for those that aren't following this, OPEB is other post-employment benefits. That's other than pension. So which basically comes down to your almost 100% of the medical. Post-retirement medical benefits. So we have estimates on what we'll need in the future, and we know what we're spending each year. And that's where the argument comes in. But I think Bob makes some excellent points that, where we're at right now. And like I said, we're not budgeting for it now. And we gotta monitor it though, because once again, it's not something we want to ignore.
I would also argue that the Board of Finance meetings are in public. The public is welcome to come and take part and listen to our discussion and ask questions. It's not something that's not transparent.
I'd like at least taxpayers who might be paying attention to realize that, we're running surpluses that exceed the tax increases we're asking for, almost for 3 years in a row, roughly. Give or take, we're pretty much running a budget surplus that's equal to the increase we're requesting.
And I know you appreciate this point, but you're quite literally like 4 heart attacks away, just to put it in its most basic terms, from eliminating that surplus. Now, I know you're hearing the point Bob is making, and that there's people who are crunching these numbers across millions of lives, as they use that term in the actuarial world, and we have been lucky. And the fact is, we've been running surpluses as a result of some fortunate medical experience, but that could turn on a dime. And if you underfund that, then you're going to have a hole somewhere else in the budget, and you're going to be borrowing money from someplace else. I know you appreciate this because you've been on the board long enough, so you cannot have it both ways. Either pay for it now, make sure it's funded, and occasionally catch a break, or underfund it, dig a hole, and then have to find that money down the line.
No, Lou, I like your point, but I feel like it is a conservative adjustment that should be made. But when you're talking about a surplus of maybe $2 million, maybe there is some flexibility to say, hey, we can reduce this a little bit and give the taxpayer a break and see how our experience goes.
But the surpluses aren't based on our budgets. They're based on the experiences that we had as a town. We didn't budget for a $2 or $3 million surplus in the medical fund. That's just how it worked out. We built in the number in the budget based on the recommendations from our actuaries and our consultants. And what happened was we did better than them. That's not because we budgeted for that. So
Jeff, I agree with you completely.
So
when
why
you start to see this pattern,
why would we budget against that?
If you see this pattern and you continue to make the same allocation, then aren't you the same appropriation? And now, when does
it's a recent pattern. It's a recent pattern.
7 times in a row, and it comes up heads 7 times. That doesn't mean it's going to come up heads the next 3 times I toss that coin.
Jeff, this is how some of these estimates are formulated in the first place. They're looking at a smoothing of 5-year averages. They're putting in formulas. They're checking how many people are insured.
And now you're agreeing.
I understand what your goal is, Jonathan. I personally am not going to vote to roll those dice. That's just me.
Now, to say to roll the dice, I find that just unacceptable. I take a little bit of that.
All right.
You got a $2 million surplus, and you're saying that you can't make some slight adjustment to try to come closer to
budgeting appropriation and actual expenses?
We just heard from the first selectman that that's exactly what they did with this budget. The actuaries were recommending a different number and they reduced it by $115,000. We did that.
And I'm saying that I don't think it's of a significant enough magnitude.
So we go against the actuarial, and I believe that we have given the town and we have given the schools enough time, and I would like to move on. Now, here's the big question. All right. This conversation, this question, what's that?
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, and we've been fortunate, and we're not going to repeat it again. As we have said, asked and answered. Thank you. On the school and towns, we have had a lot of questions of both, and we are at 10:19. Hey, I'm willing to go until 1 in the morning, people, to keep this going. All right, but I don't think anybody else does. I don't think the 54 participants want to. So I'm going to respectfully close the questioning. We are going to move on. And if we don't think we can have a discussion and we can make a decision tonight, I will be on a Monday night call at 7:30 and we will do it then. So at this point, we are done with the questioning. Thank you to all. I think we've given a lot for the superintendent, chairwoman of the Board of Education, and the first selectman to do tonight in terms of questioning and answering. And now we're going to discuss and consider the budgets that have been presented to us. And we're going to possibly vote to move a budget forward depending on how long that takes us to do. Right now, we have a budget that we are going to hopefully approve, whether it's tonight or on Monday, to a town meeting, which is currently scheduled for Tuesday, April 6th. I do believe at the end of all of this conversation, our first selectman will give us a little bit of an update on where we stand. But right now, we are looking at an April 6th town meeting. All right, we need to just go according to the process that is in place. If it changes, we will certainly make sure across the board that everyone knows if there's any changes on town meeting or budget referendum. But I do want to save that to the end. As far as discussion goes, I have plenty of notes, but I'll probably end up being more big picture at the end. So does anybody want to begin the discussion in terms of moving forward and discussing and deciding on the budget?
I'll start.
Kenneth.
Hello?
You're on. Go ahead, Ken.
I have every device in my house working and it's all, the power is going down even as we speak. I hope I have enough in this.
Ken, you have to turn the volume off on the other ones.
Okay. All right, I think I've got, wait a minute, stay with me. I think we're okay. Oh, no, we're not okay. Result of a...
As Ken is trying to figure this out, I have realized that over the last, I guess almost 3 hours, that there is a windstorm howling outside that I can hear. And I am nervous that my power is going to go out. So I I could see where there's some issues probably.
Well, I'll try to hide. Can you hear me now?
Yes, give it a shot.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. I'm sorry about all the other devices that are here. I'll try to put one away. See if I can muffle that sound. We've oh gosh. Can you hear me now?
Yep, go ahead. We can hear you, Ken. Go ahead.
Okay. We've seen a lot over the last few months about expanded needs on both the schools and the town. We've seen a lot about the reallocation of resources. It's been brought down in these last practically 3 hours of discussion. And I'd like to move us, if we could, to a consideration of a vote on this budget. We have, I think we want to affect a couple of cuts that could bring us under 1% on the tax rate. And I think the way we can do that is by reducing each of the departments, Board of Education and Board of Selectmen, by $50,000 each, and making up the balance of it through the undesignated fund. And perhaps it'd be an equivalent cut. And that should bring us, from what you told me with your calculations, Mike, will bring us under 1%. And I'd like to see us over there. And I think that shows a respect for what the boards have done. They have certainly come through with modest budgets, well defensible. Every question that we have asked in the last few months has been answered, I think, satisfactorily. And I think we are giving relief not only to the two departments by not asking for any major cuts, just trims if they can get to it, and respecting the needs of the taxpayers. All these messages that have come through, people want, basically the public has been favorably inclined to what has been fashioned. And I think if we can respect that and move ourselves to below 1% on the tax rate, I think we will have achieved the public's business.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate the opening comment. Others?
I tend to agree with Mr. Gamerman, just for style's sake, and because it doesn't make a big difference. I'd share it a little. I wouldn't make it 50-50, just more 60-40. That's just a style thing. But can you remind us, Mike, what it takes to get the actual dollar number it takes to get under 1%? Are we looking at about only $150, 150,000?
Yeah, we're I mean, if you're saying to get right under one, it's I believe it's $110,000.
All right.
Either in found revenue
Yeah.
or in cutting, reducing expenses, one or the other.
Well, I was thinking just 50 from the undesignated fund, 40 from the town, 60 from the Board of Ed. It's pretty much, it's 150. It probably makes us a little bit safer under 1%. You know, the difference is basis points.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Other thoughts? I mean, listen, before the thought that I can't help, I'll admit to everybody on this call, and I think you all probably know it, is I was really going into these budgets not wanting to cut them at all. 5 months of this, seeing what's gone into them on both sides, and I'll when I come to my closing thoughts, it's a value-based budget, but I think the Board of Education had a much harder time getting to where they were. This is not to say the Board of Selectmen did not do an unbelievable job, but I look at the history and the trends and the 1.49 coming forward, and we keep hearing it's the lowest that's been brought to us. It's hard for me to justify going lower for the students of this community. So that being said, Bob, I completely respect the 60-40, but on this particular year, I'm a little bit more inclined to go 50-50. And with like what Ken said, I mean, to get under the one and just make sure that we get under one. I think we get to like 0.95 or 0.94 or something. Now it's just a matter of throwing some digits in there. We make sure that we get there. And as you're going to hear from me later, I mean, when it comes to the unassigned fund balance, that's not a decision we're going to make tonight. That'll be something we talk about when we set the mill rate on how we want the revenue to go. But we're approving the budgets tonight. So I think if we do the 50-50, showing, as Mr. Gammerman said, the restraint, I think that I think that doing it equally is fair this year, maybe not in other years, but I just can't see going any more on the town, on the Board of Ed side than the town. And with that, I'll stop talking, because that's pretty much all I wanted to point out. But thank you. My opinion on
I
it.
would motion that the Board of Selectmen decrease their budget by 400,000 and the Board of Education decrease their budget by 600,000, and have the line item discretion be at their discretion.
Okay, so wait,
I
that was a
think
motion.
that's completely unrealistic. I mean,
Oh, wait a minute, Megan.
Yeah.
Did you just, Jonathan, you started out with, you make a motion.
Yep.
Is that a motion?
Yep, that's a motion.
All right, do I hear a second? Do I hear a second?
Mr. Chairman.
What's
Mr.
that?
Chairman,
Yes, Ken?
I should have phrased.
Ken, we can't have any more discussion unless there's a second to the motion.
Oh.
Is there a second to Jonathan's motion? Motion fails.
Mr. Chairman,
Ken, yes.
I should have phrased my recommendation in the form of a motion. That's what I'll rephrase it to right now. So I'd like to put that motion on the floor.
I thought you did, Ken, actually.
No, he did not.
Oh, I
He
thought
did-
you did say a motion.
No, he did not. It's my understanding, I did not hear that, so
My
No,
understanding did not place.
I agree.
okay.
I just thought it was up
I did
for-
not
up
hear a
for
motion.
discussion, Ken.
I heard where he was leaning and what he preferred and what he liked, but I did not hear a motion come out of that, so.
Agreed.
I'll second his
So
motion.
Mr. Gammerman, you came through with a motion on that, and Megan, you are seconding.
Yeah.
Further discussion on the motion?
I tend to agree that if we can get it under, at or slightly under 1%, that's something that I'd be in favor of. I tend to agree with Mr. Hartman about the 60-40 split. I think we're talking about relatively small dollars for either budget at that point. And I just think, given the ratios of the expenditures, it just seems more equitable is not necessarily the right word, but it's just more representative of the funds that are raised from the taxpayers.
I just want to make sure I understand Mr. Gamerman's motion. I think I understood it, but I may have misheard. He wants the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen budget to be reduced, but not by a reduction in expenditures, but by a credit being pulled from our rainy day fund.
No.
Correct?
No, to clarify, it's basically what he's saying is 50,000 out of Board of Ed, 50,000 out of town. The unassigned fund balance that we were talking about has no bearing on this until we set the mill rate.
Okay, fair enough.
I just think it's been a really tough year for the school system. I'm not trying to say it wasn't a tough year on the town side. But their budget came in and it was really, really good. I mean, I tend to agree with the chairman. There was not a lot of things that I personally would have wanted to cut. So I tend to, I don't love the 60-40. I'd be more comfortable with the 50-50, just because I think we have so many unexpected outcomes in this next upcoming year, and we need to make sure that we have the supports in place for the students that are coming back full time, that are going to have to figure out how to catch up in many ways. And there's just so many other factors going into the school side. And I'm not saying that the town side doesn't have similar issues. I just don't see the 60,000 in the school side budget to be cut. So
I agree. I think it's been an extraordinary year for everybody, but in particular, I think the employees of the town of Guilford, both on the schools and the town side have been extraordinary and have stepped in a moment and provided services on a dime. It's been absolutely remarkable. We were sitting here a year ago, not sure where we were going to be, not sure about our tax collections, not sure what we were going to be looking at. And I think it's in our best interest to stay the course. I think a 50-50 split is probably the most responsible thing that we can do right now, especially for the schools. I think there's a lot of, excuse me, a lot of unknowns relative to the schools. Not that there aren't unknowns on the town side, but there's just things that we don't know about the schools and what the impact is going to be. So I really want to, I would second, or I agree with Ken's motion. I think it's the best thing for us to do. And I really want to thank the employees of the town of Guilford. I think they've done an extraordinary job in extraordinary times.
Okay. Let me make a couple comments, and I know we're getting late. We're in a very different position than we were last year. We all know that. I took down plenty of notes over the last couple days. And, you know, we saw a pandemic raging at this time last year. Had no idea what was going to happen. We had a budget increase last year, budget increase. That was it, ended up at 2.83. Okay. And then we had a combination of state help. We had non-tax revenue increases. We had grand list growth. And we pulled $250,000 out of our unfunded, unassigned fund balance. And so what the result was a 0.87 tax increase, which I really, I've been on the board for 14 years and I hadn't seen that unless it was a reval. I mean, I'm looking at my historical spreadsheets and I was like, wow, I can't believe we got to 0.87. That happened in 2000. I wasn't on the board then. I didn't know that was possible. It is. And so now we fast forward and we see a light at the end of the tunnel. We're still at the pandemic stage. And we're listening to, you know, a 50-50, maybe, you know, 50 out of unassigned fund balance. We're looking at reductions to get under 1 again. But these budgets came in at 1.77, not 2.83. The Board of Education came in, the town came in, the debt service went down, the grand list grew more than it has in my recent memory. And now we're looking at a 1.1% tax increase. And with what we're talking about, we're getting, you know, we're looking at getting under 1. And we lost a lot of revenues. We gained revenue last year by the count of, and I don't have my spreadsheet right in front of me, but it's 500 something thousand. This year it's 665. We're losing in revenue, and we're still going to be able to pull this off. All I could say is that there are needs in these budgets that I don't think we really expected that we were going to have. Maybe a couple, you know, as you know, First Selectman Hoey mentioned, you know, Public Works has been asking for years. Social service is a dual, it's both need for COVID and need that this community's had for a while. And the Board of Education is in an unprecedented year. This is an investment year. To do what the town and the Board of Education is requesting at the numbers they're requesting is this is the perfect timing with a grand list growth to be able to invest. Now, we always look at next year and we say, well, what about next year? What are we going to get next year? 4%? We were thinking we were going to be at 3 or 4% this year, and we managed well. And I'm not going to say we. I am going to say that the towns and the schools managed well. I guess with the exception of the 50-50 split, I mean, I'm in agreement with this. We're talking basically a what, $20,000, $10,000 swing, right? One way or the other. I'm okay with 50-50 only because I think the students deserve it. I do want to make one comment before this goes to vote. Is that I'm going to repeat what I had said before about the way the Board of Finance looks at the Board of Education budget and looks at the Board of Selectmen budget. We do and can indicate to the Board of Selectmen where we would like to see reductions. I have no intention of doing that. On the Board of Education side, we can't. And I will tell you right now that I'm not instructing the Board of Education to do anything with their, this $50,000 is a general number. It is not a targeted number for anything that we have talked about tonight or over the last couple of weeks. I want to make it clear, it's a general number that the Board of Education can do whatever they want and how they reduce. And I hope what we heard tonight is actually going to inform them. And I think it will, regardless of whether it's a small reduction or a big reduction or no reduction. So with that, based on what I'm hearing, we have a motion, we have a second, we've discussed. Does anybody else have any discussion before I entertain a motion?
All the question.
I guess it's
what I would need to do is basically there's a duplicate motion here. There's more to it, all right, because the motion is on the budget, the combined budgets. So I'm going to have to read the motion basically as presented based on Mr. Gammerman's 50-50 reductions in both budgets, which also has to include the debt service, which of course there would be no reduction. So Mr. Gammerman has basically put together a motion to reduce both budgets by 50, but I need to read the numbers for the motion. Okay.
Before you do that, could I just make a quick comment?
You may, Jeff.
Thank you. So I just want to say that I do think that the budgets, and I'll be very brief, that the budgets were extremely well crafted. I think on the Board of Ed side, I do want to point out that they've responded to requests over a number of years to increase art education in the elementary schools. And I think that's kind of gotten overlooked a little bit this evening, but I think that's addressing a need that's been brought up for quite a number of years. And I think it's very beneficial to the students. On the Board of Selectmen side, one of the things I just want to point out with regard to the contract staff increases in the health department and the building department. I had the good fortune of attending last night's Planning and Zoning Commission meeting with First Selectman Hoy as a member of the audience, and it came up at that meeting that one of the applicants, the question was, how come the health director hadn't been able to issue her opinion yet? And that was because she's extremely overwhelmed. She had reviewed the application and thought it was issued an opinion saying that she was likely to approve it, but just hadn't had the chance to write up her formal approval of that application. That is just a small example of the level of effort that she's putting in and the need that the town has to hire this additional staff. Similarly, I have clients in my professional world who are experiencing the backups in the building department. So the benefits from hiring these two positions go beyond just alleviating staff shortages in those two departments. They're directly impacting the citizens of this town, whether you're a homeowner trying to apply for an application to do a project at your home, or you're a contractor trying to build a house to grow the grand list. These short-term changes will have long-term and wide-ranging impacts. So I think we should go forward with the budgets as Mr. Gammerman has presented. But I did want to get it out there that there are real tangible impacts that our citizens will feel outside of in the abstract that I've witnessed within the last 3 or 4 days.
May I just have one other word from the other side?
Go ahead, please.
we see, I think these budgets are very well crafted. I would agree. We can't forget that the taxpayers are still going through a tough time. We know from our service here, my business, that the number of unemployment certificates that are coming through are not double last year, they're quadruple. And I know our tax receipts have been okay, but I suspect that people are forgoing other things that they need just to pay. You know, that nobody doesn't want to pay their home tax. They won't pay the mortgage, or they're using stimulus money to pay it. So we've got to be very careful about, we've got to keep the lights on, but we've got to be very conscious of who we're serving as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. What I'd like to do is request, Mr. Gammerman, that I, just for formality's sake, revise your budget. So you need to approve it, and whoever seconded needs a second again, but I just need to, for official purposes. And Mr. Gammerman's motion is basically to approve a town budget for fiscal year 21-22 of $32,352,871, which is inclusive of a $50,000 reduction. A Board of Education budget in the amount of $62,395,900, inclusive of a $50,000 reduction. And a debt service budget in the amount of $10,420,988 for a total combined budget of $105,169,759. Mr. Gammerman, is that correct?
That is correct.
Do I hear a second? Whoever seconded, do they agree?
Second.
Thank you, Megan. If nothing further, I'll call the vote. Veronica Wallace,
Aye.
Megan Scanlon,
Aye.
Ken Gammerman,
Aye.
Mike Ailes, aye. Jeff Beatty,
Aye.
Bob Hartman,
Aye.
Jonathan Trotta.
Nay.
Thank you. So we have moved the budget forward. Guess what's next? Capital bonding.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hoey, please.
Begging indulgence, but I think you still need to move forward with a revenue budget, because that will need to accompany the publication of the expenditures. So you will need to make a determination on what you're going to do with the use of undesignated fund balance tonight, if you're going to do that, because that is part of the overall budget.
That's fine. I have to admit, I looked at last year's and I did not see revenue budget approved. Last year was a weird year, so I didn't see the revenue budget approved. But if we need to do that, then we can do that. We're ready to do that. Basically, it'd be to entertain, and I'll do it based on what I heard, because Mr. Gammerman put it out there. I would entertain a motion to approve the revenue budget presented to us with a use of unassigned fund balance of $50,000.
Second.
Who actually made the motion? Veronica motion? Okay. Yep. Megan second. All right. Any further discussion on the revenue budget, on the revenue projection?
So this is where we want to supplement the revenue budget by pulling money out of the rainy day fund?
Yes.
Did I hear that correctly?
Yes. By the amount of $50,000 is the amount that we're looking at.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Thank you. Anything further? All right, I'll go through roll call again. Veronica Wallace.
Aye.
Megan Scanlon.
Aye.
Ken Gammerman.
Aye.
Mike Ailes. Aye. Jeff Beatty.
Aye.
Bob Hartman.
Aye.
Jonathan Trotta.
Nay.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. First Selectman, thank you for that tip. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
We really haven't talked much about the bonding, but we've all been presented it. We've all read it. We could certainly do this tonight with some discussion based on what we've heard. We could put it in the form of a motion. I could do that based on what we've heard, or we can continue this on and have public forum and close the meeting and do this on Monday night. I'm going to ask the board if does anybody have any issues with not getting this done tonight and pushing.
Maybe a strong need for coffee.
Well, if we just put this in the form of motion and then discuss it and vote on it, we could go to public forum.
I'm good to go.
What if some board member might have questions about capital? I don't know who that might be, but maybe somebody might have a few questions.
Well, we'd be prepared to discuss it, no question.
Well, I could tell you there's what we're going to do is my intention was to separate the two, the school and the town. I believe that's the way it will be asked to the voters. So I was going to have two motions that were going to be entertained. So otherwise I can combine them, but we could at least focus on each of them. So I think what I would like to do is separate them so that the schools have a chance and the town has a chance. That being said, I am going to entertain a motion to approve the 2021-2022 Board of Education bonding request to be forwarded to Bond Council in the amount of $6,172,609. And that includes the following, and I will say the numbers because they got to be in the motion. Stadium turf field at $2,114,865. Guilford Lakes HVAC upgrades, $3,026,258. Cox boiler replacement, $370,260. Melissa Jones elevator upgrades, $473,280. Architectural and engineering services for future projects, $187,946, for the total of $6,172,609.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I just like to point out that the Guilford Lakes HVAC should have been voted on last year. So this is why this year is particularly larger than usual. It's because we could not move this forward last year.
That's a very good
For
point.
those people that are still on the call.
Well, people will watch this in the future, so it's good for them too.
Yeah.
I would also like to add just very quickly in the stadium turf field. I remember that when it went in, actually it was soon after I was on the building committee. I went to the Board of Finance and we've gotten a lot of life out of that turf field. It is amazing it's lasted as long as it has. And that $2 million is including the complete upgrade of the track as well, which they don't last forever. And so this is the time. So we got a lot of life out of it, a lot of life out of it long term. So I just wanted to add that too.
If I could just add to that as well, like
Jeff, go ahead.
The other thing that's I think is important with regard to the turf field and the track is that while it's in the Board of Education capital project bond, not just the students at Guilford High School or the elementary schools or the middle schools use that field and that track. It gets an awful lot of use by members of the public, probably more than any other field in town. When you consider the fact that it can be used throughout rainstorms, snowstorms, it's well used. So I think it's worthwhile, even though it's for the entire town, even though it's
as it should. Yeah.
Thank you. Other discussion?
So I got a couple of questions and maybe some comments if can entertain them. So I made an observation that I just wanted to throw out to the board and to the Board of Education. I don't know how accurate our vision appraisal is, or I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the service anymore, but I looked up the property card for the Guilford Lake School, and I just was a little surprised. It said the appraisal is $16,800,000 or so. And I realized that this project to fix the HVAC system is about 17.2% of the whole value of the building. And I'm actually, very open-minded into like really wise investments in our school system. And, I kind of question, are we at the point where the high school was at, where we were just pouring money into schools when we really needed to think about bonding this, for a new school? And maybe even in the case of declining enrollment, thinking about maybe combining the northern elementary schools and the southern elementary schools into maybe 2 schools instead of 4. I know that's kind of a crazy, wild idea, but it just kind of surprised me that this project has such a, large price tag compared to I think the value of the building. But perhaps that's off. That was really more of an observation, but maybe a question. Did anybody kind of realize that?
Yeah, I could answer what my thought is on that. Is if that were to happen and there was a reconfiguration and there was a change and we close the school, none of that is going to happen anytime soon. This is an immediate need.
No, and I'm not
and
saying
so
that's the case.
And I'll be honest, I almost fell off my chair when you said, something about maybe building a new school. But I stayed on my chair.
I'm for that.
But closing a school obviously is something the Board of Ed would decide, but that would not be decided for years. And this is something that has to happen literally this summer.
Should have happened last year.
I just was wondering if we were considering it, seeing such a big repair cost, given the value of the building itself. I was a little surprised.
HVAC is expensive, Jonathan.
Mr. Chairman?
As noted here in the request.
And Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman?
Wait a minute, hold on. I got the first selectman who's raised his hand first, so. Matt,
Yeah, I think Dr. Freeman's probably going to go at the same position I am at. Building a new elementary school would cost us $50 million if it cost us $1. And probably more so because we would try to squeeze it on the same piece of property that the existing school is on. So I'm not sure that using a property card valuation of $16 million for a school that we know the replacement cost to build, including land, is going to be in excess of 50 million or more. I don't, pick a number. So I'm not sure that's really a good denominator to use.
It wasn't supposed to be a conclusive analysis. I just was surprised that it's such a big repair, Are we, wasting good money, for bad by not just saying, hey, this school's had it, stop fixing it up and start buying a new one. I don't know when it reaches that point, but
you make a repair like this, it'll last a while. That's what happened at Leet. Leet had the same issue, and Leet's going strong, and they had the same issue, and they had their HVAC replaced, and Leet is not going anywhere.
I've got concerns about capital, and yep, it's a little bit of a broken record. I mean, each year, basically, I've been concerned that we keep pushing the bonding up. And we never really, during the life cycle of the debt for the school, said, hey, let's take it easy a little bit. We've made a major investment in the high school. Let's not keep pushing these bonding requests higher and higher. And I remember a time, maybe it was a little while ago, but, I would get requests from the school for bonding requests that were less than $1 million. And I think we're looking at one this year that's getting close to 6.2 million. It's a pretty substantial request. So again, year after year, I've asked, can the school just pace the bonding request to some degree and take on, one large project perhaps instead of 2? And I still feel that way. And I wonder if the Board of Education would consider, taking on one project this year, taking the next big project on next year, and, you know, starting to just kind of take it easy on that pile of debt that gets poured in and how fast it gets poured in, and, you know, how fast we're burning it off, and just a little bit of easement on the pace of capital spending.
That's what they did, Jonathan. They didn't have a bonding issue last year.
Well, I think, you know, last year we did bond for one of the projects, right? But I think if we bonded for both of them, it was going to be too high because of the executive order.
So it wasn't, I can speak to that. We had an issue for the Baldwin HVAC and we had an issue for the Lakes HVAC. The issue with the referendum was around moving a bond request that was seen as essential and unavoidable or an emergency to provide habitable space. We met with the town attorney. We felt that the Baldwin project met that condition primarily because we were halfway through it. It was a 2-year phased project. As Lakes had not been begun yet and we did not have temporary systems in place, we didn't feel that we could in good faith make that argument, therefore held it and carried it over for this year. I think, Jonathan, we were looking to do one big project each year. The only large project this year would have been the turf field replacement, were it not for deferring the second large project of Lakes HVLC last year. That was in direct response to the crisis, and we're lucky we made it through the year without a catastrophic failure. It needs to be replaced. And to your earlier point, you know, the value of the school may be $16 million if we were going to resell a public school. The value in continuing to use that space for the children is far beyond that. That school is in good repair. We get good service out of that building. With this investment, you will get years of service from that building. I don't think that the town has any intention of selling that space. It's in a residential neighborhood. You wouldn't, I don't think the value speaks to the use value that we receive from that location.
Yeah, I mean, I could see your point. You know, the building has great utility, but, you know, it's interesting that you're pouring $3 million at it in this request.
I would use the word investing.
Yep. And then, Jeff, you know, I do agree with you that the Board of Education last year did forego one project and push it off into the following year. But I can't say they really, you know, did that of their own will. It was sort of a limitation of the executive orders at the time. In my opinion.
I will say, Mr. Trotta, I will say that every year the Board of Ed and the Guilford Public Schools Administration looks very carefully at bonding. There are plenty of projects we could be doing right now that we are holding off on purely because of the balance that you were talking about. So again, you know, I want that to be appreciated. This is a very carefully thought out approach. We are well aware of the fact that this community invested in a new high school and have been well aware of what that has done to the debt service. And every year, these bond requests are made after careful deliberation with that in mind, with the community in mind, and with prioritizing what absolutely has to be done to keep our buildings up and running.
Okay, you know, and my concerns just go a little further too, that, you know, prior to the high school, our debt ratio compared to our total budget was pretty low. I'm sorry, I don't have an exact figure, but I mean, it was substantially lower than what our residents have gotten used to in order to finance the high school. And I feel like if they're going to just be getting used to that debt ratio to our budget, that we're never going to just let the residents return to this lower, more comfortable debt level.
You did get this. You
piling
did, Jonathan,
more capital expenses onto the budget.
Jonathan, you did the same graph chart that we all got on debt service, right? That it's going down. And the smartest thing to do.
Yeah, I realize we're hitting a peak for the high school debt, but if you look at it as a percentage of our budget before we embarked on the high school, it's much lower than what we're going to see from.
Yeah, you know why? Because we underinvested.
Yeah, it's the first school in 50 years.
We completely underinvested, and we didn't have the need. We didn't need to. The schools were still fairly new. That was 20 years ago. That was 10 years ago. We didn't need them.
So this is absolutely my concern, is that you want to just adopt this new higher debt level. I mean, it was the biggest historic capital purchase in the history of the town.
Jonathan, it was voted on. Listen, I'm about to call the question.
Mr. Chairman,
I get it. But when we talk about bonding, you said the other night, well, it went from 30 and went to 20 and you put it, we saved 20, what was it over the
22 million.
$22 million in taxpayer money that we saved in debt service because we moved it up 20 years.
Mike, the question
10
isn't
years.
that the high school wasn't a good investment. I voted for it. It was a great financial decision. And the question is, are we going to get used to a debt level that finances this huge historical project after it passes because we keep lumping on other projects? Or are we going to return to a little bit more conservative debt level that we enjoyed before we purchased the high school?
Mr. Chairman, I think we've already legislated the purchase of the high school. Can we move on?
Yeah.
That is not the question, Rob.
It is.
It is not.
You're afraid we're going to buy another high school. It's okay. We're not.
That is the most foolish comment I've ever heard. I'm sorry, sir. I take offense to it.
Fine.
Mr. Hoey, did you have something to say?
No, it would belabor the point. I can make it at another time in a personal conversation with Mr. Trotter.
Very well. I'm going to do roll call vote. Veronica Wallace. Sorry, you're muted.
Yeah. Yes, aye.
Megan Scanlon.
Aye.
Ken Gammerman. Ken Gammerman.
Put your thumb up.
All right, up there he is. I see him waving. Okay, we got it. Mike Ailes, aye. Jeff Beatty.
Aye.
Bob Hartman.
Aye.
Jonathan Trotta.
Nay.
Okay. One more motion. We all have the information from the town that was presented to us. We knew it was coming, but it's here now. We have it in our board pack. I would like to entertain a motion to approve a 2-year bonding request to be forwarded to bond council and be asked of voters in the fiscal year 2021-22 town meeting and referendum in the amount of $4,497,012. And this includes 2 public works dump trucks at 560. I'm sorry, I got to do the total request. $571,200. General road reconstruction at $1,020,000. Chimney Corners coastal resilience at $1,020,000. Lake Quanapog Dam, $306,000. Public safety storage building, $1,093,746. Fire department training facility, $547,776. Library slate roof replacement, $101,490. Public works fuel tank replacement at $408,000 for the total of $4,497,012. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second, I see Ken's hand go up, so I got my second, okay? Further discussion on the town capital project request on bonding.
I had a quick question on the Lake Quanapog Dam. Is there any potential for grant money to help us rebuild that?
Dam, yes, eventually there will be, but these are the engineering costs to try to determine what happens, and we might be able to reclaim some of those costs in any either state or federal grants that might come our way. And I'm gonna anticipate another question. The same exists for the Chimney Corners coastal resilience. As you may have recalled, I think on Tuesday night, I mentioned that through the Council of Governments, we get a bite at the apple for special transportation funds. We're due another bite at that apple this year. So we already have an application in with the Council of Governments for lot SIP funding for this project.
Matt, excuse me.
Yes.
I just want to correct you on that. The application will only apply for Falcon Road because Falcon Road is a collector road and Chimney Corners is not a collector road. And unfortunately, it doesn't qualify for that funding.
I stand corrected. I knew we had some money coming for one of those 2 projects.
Yes.
Thank you, Janice.
What one quick question, if I could.
Jeff, go ahead.
The public safety storage building, Mr. First Selectman, that's that bonding is also for the design phase of it. That's not for the actual construction, correct?
No, that's design and construction for that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that was that as you may recall, that number was revised down from 1.5 for just 2 bays added on to the existing fire department facility. But because of the collaboration between the police department and fire department, they are looking at a freestanding 4-bay storage facility for vehicles and equipment.
Great, thank you.
So my questions are about the 4 additional bays and the training center for the fire department. And as I had concerns that the Board of Education could pace their capital spending by perhaps staggering some projects. Their projects were based on repairs to facilities, but I see the town requests here as expansionary. And I know there was some talk about possibly regionalizing a training facility when we had our budget workshops, but I don't feel like I'm aware of some kind of analysis in that regard. And I feel, again, that given the circumstances facing taxpayers, that it's difficult to justify some projects that are expansionary. If we think there's real long-term benefit to save some money, that may be some kind of rationale. But again, I would question if the timing is right, given the circumstances of the residents and the taxpayers, to take on some new projects that expand the footprint of the town.
Jonathan, thanks for that question. Let me try to answer it. I had asked the very same question of the police and fire department organization, and let me give you some information. Preliminary savings on overtime associated with off-site training, because we have to send all of our folks out a couple times a year, and that's $20,000 to $25,000 a year at the fire department. And they are done at New Haven Fire Academy, which means we pay travel and often overtime costs because firefighters can train if they're on their regular shift while they're at fire headquarters. So that overtime costs and the cost to move them to the fire training facility in New Haven, as well as the fees associated with it, would be reduced over the next 30 years. One other thing that most people aren't aware of is that the current ISO rating, which is the rating that determines the efficacy of your fire department, is currently class 3, which is there aren't that many class 3s around the state. Any drop in that classification down to something like a 4 would most likely result in a 7 to 12% increase in insurance premium costs for residents and businesses in Guilford. So this is going to benefit taxpayers directly in terms of their insurance costs for their properties. The facility would also provide the most current OSHA compliant platform to meet state regulations, and the lifespan of that facility is 20 to 30 years. Additionally, the police department could become a resource for regional training, including SWAT active shooter. And it is part of an integrated critical incident training with the fire department and police department. And while we don't have any projections in terms of us renting out that facility for other fire departments, that is another opportunity for us to leverage this investment.
I think you brought up some excellent points, Mr. First Selectman. I appreciate the information. I think I didn't really have a lot of those pieces before, and it's excellent that an analysis is going on in that direction. Can you say, though, that you've got sort of a cost-benefit analysis completed? Like, could you say it's a net benefit to the town, or we're really just going to end up with net costs? Because it does seem like price tag's pretty substantial. I think what the bay is the additional bays are 1.5 million, right? Training facility, 650,000. So we're up to like 2.15 million, right?
Yeah, but the cost benefit analysis is only on the training facility. That's the only thing that was requested. There's an additional cost. There's an additional opportunity for cost benefit analysis. The old public works garage is used for a storage facility for a significant number of pieces of apparatus for the fire department. assuming assuming we close on the Thane property, we'll be able to move some of the public works and park and recreation storage over to that facility at Public Works. And if we are able to clear out the police department stuff there, that piece of property could come back on the market and for sale and become a tax producing piece of property. So there's a bunch of pieces that are associated.
Are you considering
with
too
that four bay storage facility?
Are you considering too that it might extend the useful life of expensive equipment like an engine?
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that point up. The gear that is being stored outside by the police department is in desperate need of indoor storage, particularly the stuff that doesn't get used regularly.
Now, I got the feeling that you'll say no, but given the financial circumstances and given that you are actually on your way to a pretty good cost benefit analysis, would it be possible to maybe just consider waiting a year and really looking at how to regionalize it and utilize it and come up with cost benefit that, you know, gets down to brass tacks and is fairly accurate?
It's a fair question, but I think you know my answer. We've determined that this is the appropriate time to do it, and particularly since the Board of Selectmen only comes to the Board of Finance every 2 years for bonding appropriation. We are on a 2-year cycle, not a 1-year cycle. So there is some time here, and you guys are going to have the opportunity to weigh in on this when we go to contract anyway.
Okay, I mean, it's only a sniff test, but it does seem like the training center might have some real promise to be regionalized. The 4-bay garage, I just curious if, you know, cost and benefit really are going to give any kind of net benefit to the town. Right. The end of it. I mean, we're leaving the truck outside, right? Or the equipment outside.
That's a lot of it. Well, and we have equipment that's inside currently, and as I mentioned, the ability for us to free up the old Public Works facility and put that up for sale and potentially into a tax producing piece of property.
Still an excellent answer. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
All right. Based on that, I'm going to call the vote. Everyone remember what it is at this point? Veronica Wallace.
Aye.
Megan Scanlon.
Aye.
Ken Gammerman. He's waving. I got you. Mike Ailes. Aye. Jeff Beatty.
Aye.
Bob Hartman.
Aye.
Jonathan Trotta.
I'm gonna abstain.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, our voting is done. I don't believe there's any further votes. And we have one agenda item left. It goes without saying, thank you, everyone. I know it's late. We got through the votes. We had spirited discussion, as we always do. So thank you all. Now, Matt, I think for the viewing audience and for all of us, I think it's worth maybe making a quick mention about what the situation is regarding voting. We currently have a town meeting scheduled for April 6th. We have a budget referendum scheduled for April 20th, but as you all probably read in the Guilford Courier today, which I picked up right before this meeting, it's in flux. So, Mr. Hoey, do you want to give us a really brief summary on that?
Here we go. You know I'm not capable of that.
I know that was a mistake. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, as around noontime today, I thought we had the appropriate fix. We had a commitment from the governor's office through a great amount of work by Representative Scanlon and Senator Cohen, lobbying directly into the governor's office for him to issue an executive order allowing for absentee voter, no excuse balloting through the end of his executive authority, which expires on the 19th of April, which, as you all know, was the day before we were supposed to have our referendum. That was workable because we could have moved the referendum to the 19th. And then we were planning on moving the annual budget meeting to the 22nd of March. And we'd worked out all the details relative to printing stuff in the paper and all that kind of thing. So we would have had a full 4 weeks to facilitate absentee ballots. Well, one of the things that the governor's office stumbled on was the problem relative to the bonding. Our ability to move the dates on budgets without having to do charter revision did not, in that statute, does not extend to the issuing of bonds. So the deal is dead, basically, because that would have forced us to have 2 separate referendums, one for the bonding, one for the budget itself. So at this point, we are back to April 6th for the annual budget meeting and April 20th for the vote. What I think we should be encouraged about is I don't know whether anybody had an opportunity to see this today, but the governor has announced that he is relaxing the protocols around COVID, including beginning on Friday, April 2nd, outdoor, not then, excuse me. As of Friday, March 19th, I'm sorry. Indoor gathering sizes are up to 100. Social and recreational gatherings at commercial venues are up to 100. So theoretically, we could hold an in-person annual budget meeting. Alternatively, we could do one via Zoom, all Zoom, and as an alternative to that, a hybrid. As I understand, the hybrids that folks have tried to do around the state have been disastrous, including one in Madison just recently. So we are back to standard voting. Try as I might to get the thing changed so we could do no excuse absentee voting to limit the disenfranchisement of voters who didn't feel comfortable coming out and voting in person. But based on the vaccine rate that's taking place, we're not all going to be vaccinated by April 20th, but a substantial portion of the community will have received their vaccine by that point, if form holds true, because our vaccination rates in Guilford at the 75 plus threshold, the 65 plus threshold, greatly exceed the statewide averages and the regional averages. So there's some hope that folks will feel more comfortable come out and vote, but I'm disappointed to say that one of the provisions in our charter just didn't allow for the movement of the days, and the governor's office was not willing to extend the executive order just to accommodate the town of Guilford's charter. That's about as succinct as I can make it, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you for the update. It was very fluid, and now we have some direction. So thank you for trying, though.
My pleasure.
All right. That being said, last item on the agenda is public forum. We have dwindled on our participants. I do see somebody raise their hand. I also want to note that since we've been on the call, 4 emails have come through that I actually have forwarded to me. They have to technically be entered, but I can summarize them. But I do have the emails open, and they really should be right in the public forum. So that being said, I do see somebody's hand up, and that's Deborah Spalding. I'm going to lower your hand, and you can name, address, and comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recognize the lateness of the hour and appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Deborah Spalding, and I live at 45 Graves Ave. I am also a member of the Town Pension Committee. I wanted to state my support for fully funding an OPEB trust, and as part of that, requiring full annual contributions into the trust based on established actuarial methods and assumptions. The town has made a commitment to pay post-employment benefits to those who have worked in service to our community. Setting aside money today to pay these future benefits is imperative for ensuring the long-term financial health of the town. This unfunded liability exists and we can't kick it down the road. As a Board of Finance, you are all well aware of the power of compounding. It is one of the most basic concepts in finance. Contributions compound over time and exponentially pay off in meeting liabilities tomorrow. It's very simple. The sooner we fund it, the more value we create. My professional career has been in finance, and at one point I served as the Chief Investment Officer for the state of Connecticut. In that role, I had investment oversight of the state's pension plans and OPEB trust, and I saw firsthand what years of underfunding have done to those plans and the resulting undue and totally avoidable burden it has placed on all of us as state taxpayers. Let us not repeat the mistakes that we have seen in Hartford. It can be very seductive at times to think, well, you know, times are tough. Life right now is hard. Let's temper our plan, maybe shave a bit off here and there. But unfortunately, that thinking is short-sighted and dangerous. Contributions today are a far less burden on our taxpayers than the bill they would otherwise inherit tomorrow. And at the same time, forget about dollars and math for a second. A failure to adequately address unfunded liabilities will have secondary consequences that are just as negative. It could jeopardize our bond rating. If the town does not demonstrate a commitment today, the credit rating agencies will take note. And as you all know, a debt downgrade would increase the town's cost of debt, would be a far bigger hit to the taxpayers than making contributions into an OPEB trust. Never mind, a ballooning unfunded liability will discourage future families from moving to our town. It will be an overhang that will hang like an albatross around our necks for years to come. So with this in mind, I would ask that the Board of Finance demonstrate sound financial stewardship by taking proper and prudent steps to fund the OPEB trust. Guilford residents have voted you in for a reason, and our faith is in each of you. The structure of the OPEB trust and its funding are complex. The Board of Finance should step up and own it. It will show the town's leaders recognize their duty and care to those who have worked tirelessly in service to our town, to today's taxpayers, and today's children who are tomorrow's taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. I don't see any more hands raised. What I want to do, and I think these are still pertinent and appropriate, even though it's after our vote. There were 4 emails that came through in letters, and some of it, a couple of them I think had to do with they couldn't figure out how to do the get on in public forum. So I'm looking at my email right now and not a bunch of faces. Very quickly, these all came in between 8 o'clock and 8:30. Alina Kazienko wrote, hello, Board of Finance members. I'm writing to express concern over not budgeting the part-time equity position. I know that this piece is important to the district and will positively affect every child in the district. This work is very important to moving our district forward and into the future, creating global citizens and providing context for equity and social justice. Please consider keeping this small part of the budget, as it is also symbolic of what our board, our board and town values for their kids. She just said she was a mother of a 2nd grader. She did not provide her address. We will seek that out for the record. Holly Kloon wrote, I am expressing my full support of the teacher residency program and the part-time equity officer position for the Guilford Public Schools. The teacher residency program would be invaluable to our students, and the equity officer is greatly needed. We need diversity and different perspectives in order to have honest conversations about race, equity, and inclusion. I don't think the conversations are happening, especially in the schools. By not having these positions, we are in a way creating a gap of misunderstanding. I hope you consider the positive effect these positions would have on our students, our schools, and our community. Many thanks for all the time and work you do. Holly Kloon is at 51 Sugarloaf Road. There was a letter sent by the Lee ABAR. I will submit this into record, of course, if it hasn't already been, but there's numerous parents that have signed this. And it reads, dear members of the Guilford Board of Finance, we are writing in support of the Guilford Public Schools budget proposal approved by the Board of Education on February 8th. In particular, we want to call our support for the 2 equity-related programs, the residency program and the part-time equity officer. As a committee, we applaud Dr. Freeman's actions to promote equity, justice, and anti-racism in our schools. We believe that these efforts benefit all of our students. And we've seen firsthand that there is strong support for this work within our community. Our own parent-teacher-led efforts have been met with immediate and strong support, first as we started at Calvin Lee, and now just a few months later as anti-bias, anti-racist committees are now in operation at all 6 K-8 schools in the district. While we hope for a continued sense of urgency and increased investment in professional development and curriculum enhancements, the residency program and part-time equity officer represent a fiscally conservative approach to continuing to move us forward during a challenging time. We hope you will join. Sorry, I got cut off. We hope you will join us in supporting these initiatives and approve the budget as is. Again, numerous parents signed that. The final one actually came through Mary Jane. She had received this from Ellen Crean, subject 3 equity positions at Guilford High School. I attended the Board of Finance meeting March 4th via Zoom. I could not find the raised hand symbol on my computer, so I am emailing my support of the equity liaison position, the teacher residency position, and the social worker position in the Board of Education proposed budget. I also feel that the declining enrollment should be considered as part of a school closing plan to reduce our property taxes. My small house of 1,300 square feet is taxed at $4,900 a year. When I moved to Guilford in 2008, the property taxes were $2,400. This is a huge jump in a town of a declining enrollment in our schools. I did vote for the new high school, and I do not regret that vote. High quality education is a benefit to our town and home value, but maintaining the older school buildings is burdensome, and we should work towards at least one school closing. I also believe in regionalizing school administration. These tiny school districts along the shoreline are far too expensive. Consolidation of Branford, Guilford, Madison at least needs to be the financial planning for the next 5 years. And again, I do not believe I see an address. We will seek that out. And now I see all your faces again. That is all I've received in public forum for letters. Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman,
Veronica.
just quickly, for those who may listen to this meeting or watch this meeting, the Guilford Courier's article is incorrect. They have they mention in the article a public hearing on Saturday, March the 7th. And I just want to say that there is no public hearing on Saturday.
Thank you, Veronica, for pointing that out. And while we're on that subject about another meeting, because we got everything done tonight over what appears to be exactly 4 hours, it's 11:30. We will not need the meeting on Monday, March 8th. Anything further? It's late. Thank you all.
I'll move we adjourn.
Second.
Thank you both. And with that, all in favor?
Thank you all.
Aye. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful morning.
Right.